The rifle barrel touched Eleanor Whitmore's forehead before she opened her eyes. "Don't you move," a young man's voice cracked. "Not 1 inch." She didn't scream. She'd stopped screaming a long time ago. She just raised 2 trembling hands and whispered, "I ain't got nothing worth takin', mister." "Then why are you sleepin' in our barn?" "Because every door in 3 counties shut in my face, and I was too tired to walk to the next one." Boots came fast through the mud. An older man filled the doorway. "Samuel, lower it." "But Caleb, I said lower the gun." Before I go on, if this story finds you today, do me a kindness. Subscribe to the channel. Stay with me all the way to the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far Ellie's story travels. Now let's begin. Caleb Walker crossed the barn slow, the way a man moves toward a spooked animal, and he pushed the rifle barrel down toward the dirt with 2 fingers. "Put it up, Sam. Now." Samuel Walker lowered the gun, but his jaw stayed tight. She could be one of Carter's people, sent to spy. "She's a woman sleeping in wet clothes on a pile of hay," Caleb said. "Carter don't send spies with holes in their boots." Eleanor pressed herself back against the stall boards, one arm still up, the other clutched around a soaked carpet bag that held every single thing she owned in the world, which was almost nothing. Caleb crouched down in front of her. He didn't reach for her. He just looked at her long and quiet, the way honest men look at things they're trying to understand. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Eleanor," she said. "Folks call me Ellie." "And how long you been out there, Ellie?" She opened her mouth to lie. She'd gotten good at lying. "Fine, I'm fine, just passing through, don't trouble yourself." But something about the way this stranger held still, the way he waited without judging, cracked her open like a dropped egg. "9 days, she said. 9 days since a roof." Samuel shifted his weight. 9 days. "And for that," Ellie went on, because the words were coming now, and she couldn't stop them. "A barn like this one 2 towns back. And for that a church step till the preacher's wife ran me off. And for that—" She stopped, swallowed. "Don't matter, it's all the same road." Caleb studied the mud caked to her hem, the split leather at her toes, the gray in her face that had nothing to do with the storm. "Ma'am," he said, "when was the last time somebody offered you a meal?" Ellie blinked at him. She had braced for 100 things, for a boot in the ribs, for being dragged out by her collar into the rain, for the word she'd heard in a dozen towns, the word thrown at her back like a stone, lazy, useless, too big to be any good to a man, too much to feed. She had braced for cruelty, because cruelty was all she'd been handed for as long as she could remember. She had not braced for that question. Her voice failed. She tried again. "I don't recall, mister. You don't recall?" "No, sir." Caleb stood. He turned to his brother. "Sam, go tell Thomas to put another plate on." "Caleb." "Go on." Samuel looked at Ellie one more time, and something in his young face wrestled with itself. Then he leaned the rifle in the corner and walked out into the gray morning. Caleb held out his hand to her. A plain, calloused, work-broken hand. "Come on up out of there, Miss Ellie," he said. "You'll catch your death sleeping in wet hay, and I'd sooner you didn't do it under my roof." She stared at the hand like it might be a trap. Hands had not been kind to her, but she was cold clear to the bone, and she was tired in a way that lived deeper than her body, and so she took it. He pulled her up gentle like she weighed nothing at all, though she knew good and well she didn't. "There," he said. "Now, you favor coffee. I favor anything hot, sir," she admitted. The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile. "Reckon we can manage that much." The kitchen at Black Creek Ranch was warm, and that warmth hit Ellie so hard she near wept in the doorway. She stood there dripping ashamed of the puddle spreading under her boots until a second man came around the table with a folded blanket already in his hands. "You're letting the heat out, ma'am, standing there," he said, and draped it over her shoulders before she could argue. "Thomas Walker. Middle of these two and the only one with any manners." I heard that, Samuel said from the stove. Meant for you two. Ellie clutched the blanket. I don't mean to be trouble. You ain't trouble, Thomas said easy. You're wet. Sit. She sat. The chair groaned under her and she flinched at the sound, because she'd learned to flinch at that sound in every eating house from Cheyenne to here. But not one of the three men so much as glanced at the chair. Caleb set a tin cup of coffee in front of her. Thomas set down a plate eggs, salt pork, a heel of bread still steaming. Ellie looked at it. Then she looked at the three of them. This whole plate, she said, is for me. Thomas paused. Course it is. The whole thing, ma'am, Caleb said quiet. Eat before it goes cold. She ate. She tried to eat slow, tried to keep her dignity, and she failed at it, and she was too hungry to be proud. And the three brothers of Black Creek did the kindest thing anyone had done for her in longer than she could reckon. They looked away and let her. Nobody watched a starving woman eat. Nobody made a joke of it. Samuel busied himself with the fire. Thomas wiped down a counter that was already clean. And Caleb stood by the window with his coffee looking out at the rain, giving her the only thing she truly needed in that moment, which was to not be seen. It was Thomas who finally spoke careful, the way you'd speak to keep a wild thing from bolting. You got people, Miss Ellie, somewhere? Somebody's wondering where you got to. Ellie's fork paused. No, sir, nobody's wondering. Husband. No. Folks? Buried. She said it plain without asking for pity, which was somehow harder to hear than if she'd wept. Ma when I was small. Pa 2 years back. He was the last of 'em. Samuel over by the fire turned around. And you just what? Walked off a woman alone. Wasn't much choice in it. Ellie set the fork down. After Pa passed, there wasn't a thing left for me in that town. So I put what I could carry in a bag, and I started walking, and I figured somewhere down the road there'd be honest work for honest hands. Her mouth twisted, not quite bitter. Turns out folks don't hire the hands. They hire the face and the size of a body and whatever story they've already told themselves 'fore you say a word. I've stood in doorways and watched a man decide I was lazy while I was still asking after work. Watched a woman decide I'd eat her out of house and home 'fore I'd earn my keep. That ain't right, Samuel said, and he sounded almost angry about it. Right's got nothing to do with it, Ellie said. It's just how the world's built. I stopped being surprised by it a long ways back. She looked down at the empty plate. Which is why a plate of eggs and 3 men who won't watch me eat is about the kindest thing that's happened to me since the burial. So, thank you. None of them knew what to say to that. Caleb looked into his coffee. Thomas found something to do with the rag. And Samuel, who'd had a gun to her head an hour past, turned back to the fire with his ears gone red. When the plate was clean, Ellie set down her fork and folded her hands. I can pay you back, she said. Not in money. I ain't got money. But I can work. I can work harder than I look like I can, and I know that ain't saying much the way I look. The way you look, Caleb repeated. You don't have to be polite about it, sir. She lifted her chin, and there was steel under the shame. I know what I am. I'm a big woman. Every town I've walked into, folks took one look and decided what I could and couldn't do 'fore I opened my mouth. So I'll say it, for you have to. But I'll also say this. I can cook. I can figure sums quicker than most men I can mend. I can doctor a sick animal. And I have never in my life been afraid of a hard day. So if there's work here, any work at all, I'll do it for a roof, and I'll do it right. The kitchen went quiet. Rain ticked on the glass. Samuel spoke first, still hard, still suspicious. How do we know any of that's true? You don't, Ellie said. Same as I don't know you won't turn me out come noon. Reckon we'll both find out. Samuel opened his mouth. Caleb held up a hand. That's fair, Caleb said. That's about the fairest thing I've heard said in this kitchen in a year. He set down his cup. Storms washed the low road out anyhow. Nobody's traveling today, and I won't put a soul back out in that. You'll stay till it clears, Miss Ellie. We'll talk about the rest when the sun's up proper. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Caleb? Thank you, Caleb. Ellie glanced around the kitchen, then really looked at it, the bookkeeper in her waking up, whether she wanted it to or not. The bare pegs where pots ought to hang. The single sack of flour where there should have been 4. The mended shirts on the 3 of them, mended and mended again, till the mending had mending. She'd walked into poorer places, but not many that were trying so hard to hide it. Been a hard year, she said. It wasn't a question. Caleb's eyes came up sharp. What makes you say that? Your salt pork's near gone, and it's only July. You've got 1 milk cow's worth of butter for 3 grown men. And that boy, she nodded at Samuel, is wearing his brother's old boots with newspaper in the toes, and it ain't 'cause he likes the fashion. Samuel's jaw dropped. How in the... I ran a store 12 years, Samuel. I can read a man's ledger off his boots. She said it gently. I'm not shaming you. Lord knows I've got no room to shame anybody. I'm just saying you 3 didn't have to feed a stranger this morning. You've barely got enough to feed yourselves, and you did it anyway. She shook her head slow. That's not nothing, boys. In my experience, that's near everything. Thomas set a hand on the back of a chair. We lost near half the herd this winter, he admitted, quiet, like it cost him to say. Worst cold in 20 years. Froze standing up in the snow. What we got left, we were gonna sell come fall to square the year. He looked at Caleb. It'll be tight, but we'll make it. We always make it. We always make it, Caleb agreed. But there was a weight in how he said it, the weight of a man who'd been telling himself that same sentence for a long time and was starting to wonder how many more winters it could carry. It might have ended there, a small, quiet kindness on a rainy morning, if the dogs hadn't started up in the yard. All 3 brothers went still at once. Ellie watched the change come over them. Caleb's shoulders squaring. Thomas setting down his rag. Samuel's hand drifting back toward that rifle in the corner. Ryder, Samuel said. In this weather, Thomas said. Only one fool rides in this weather. Boots on the porch. A fist on the door hard, and entitled the knock of a man who has never once in his life been kept waiting. Caleb opened it. The man on the porch didn't wait to be asked in. He stepped through dripping, shaking rain off a coat that cost more than the whole Walker herd, and he swept the room with pale eyes until they landed on Ellie and stopped. Well, he said. The rumors are true then. Mornin', Mr. Carter, Caleb said flat. Didn't recall inviting you. Nathaniel Carter smiled. It was a smile with no warmth anywhere in it. Neighbors don't need invitations, Caleb. We're practically family, you and I. Leastways, we will be once you come to your senses about that back 40. Land ain't for sale. Everything's for sale. Carter's eyes hadn't left Ellie. Some things just cost more than a man can pay. And you, he tilted his head at her, are a new face. You wouldn't be the woman folks in town are whispering about, the one these boys took in off the road. Ellie stood. She didn't know why she stood, except that she'd spent 9 days being talked over and something in her would not sit for it one more time. My name's Eleanor Whitmore, she said, and I don't believe I caught yours. Carter's brows went up. He looked at Caleb. It talks. She talks, Caleb said, and there was a warning buried low in his voice. You'll speak to her like she's a person, Carter, or you'll speak to her from the far side of my door. The room tightened. Samuel's hand closed around the rifle. Thomas took one slow step to put himself at Ellie's shoulder. A small thing, a body's width of space, but Ellie felt it clear down in her chest. Nobody had stepped toward her in defense in years. Folks stepped away from her. They crossed streets. Carter raised both gloved hands, all easy amusement. Peace, gentlemen. I meant no insult to the lady. He tipped his hat at Ellie with exaggerated courtesy. Nathaniel Carter, ma'am. I own the Bar C, and about half of everything else worth owning in this valley, including, it seems, the note on this fine ranch. Silence. Ellie watched Caleb's jaw work. What did you say? Carter reached inside his coat and drew out a folded paper, crisp and dry, protected, careful from the rain, when the man himself was not. He set it on the table with 2 fingers and slid it across. Your father's debt, Caleb, to the Cheyenne Land and Cattle Company. Come due this spring." He smiled again. "And the Cheyenne Land and Cattle Company, as of the 1st of the month, is me. I bought the paper, which means I hold the note on Black Creek. $1,200, gentlemen, or the ranch reverts to the holder. 30 days. Thomas snatched the paper up. Pa never borrowed $1,200 in his life. He hated debt worse than he hated you. And yet, Carter spread his hands. There's his mark, plain as day. Ellie watched the three brothers crowd over the paper, watched the blood drain out of their faces one by one, watched Samuel, the hard one, the suspicious one, go white and young and scared. And she watched Caleb's hands, those big steady hands, begin very slightly to shake. "This can't be right," Caleb said. Not to Carter, to himself. To the room. Pa was careful. Pa never— "Grief makes men forget," Carter said smoothly. "And your father was a grievin' man at the end, wasn't he, after your mother? A man'll sign a great many things when he's lost his way." He picked his hat back up off the table. "I'll leave the note. Read it careful. 30 days, Caleb. I'm a reasonable man. I'd rather you sold me the land clean and walked away with something in your pockets than watch the bank take it and leave you nothing. Think on it." He turned for the door. Then he stopped and looked back at Ellie one more time, and the warmth-less smile came again. "And you, Miss Whitmore, a word of neighborly advice. These boys are about to lose everything they've got. This is a sinking ship, and a smart woman doesn't tie herself to the anchor." He tipped his hat. "There's always work at the Bar C for a woman who knows which way the wind's blowin'." The door shut behind him. His horse splashed off into the rain. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Samuel slammed the rifle stock against the floor. "He's lyin'. Pa never—" "Sam." Caleb's voice was gray. "He forged it, Caleb. He had to if Pa would never." "Sam, that's enough." Caleb dropped into a chair. He looked 10 years older than he had 5 minutes before. He put the paper down flat and stared at it like it was a snake. $1,200. We ain't got $1,200. We ain't got $200. Not after the winter we had. Thomas sat down slow across from him. "Then we lose it." "We don't lose it." "Caleb, how he owns the note. If it's got Pa's mark on it." "It ain't got Pa's mark on it," Ellie said. Every head in the room turned. She hadn't meant to say it. She'd meant to stay small, stay quiet, stay grateful, and out of the way of these men's private ruin. But she'd been looking at that paper the whole time upside down across the table, the way you can't help but read a thing that's in front of you, and she couldn't hold her tongue. "What did you say?" Caleb asked. Ellie came around the table. "May I?" Caleb slid the paper to her. She bent over it. And the three brothers watched a change come over the big, quiet woman who'd been sleeping in their barn an hour ago, watched her go sharp, focused, still as a hawk over a field. "Whoever wrote this," she said slowly, "knew what a loan note ought to look like. But they didn't know cattlemen. Look here." She pointed. "The interest, 2% monthly. A land and cattle company charges that to a stranger, maybe. But your pa borrowed from folks he knew. Nobody charges a neighbor 2 a month. That's a robber's rate. That's a rate you write when you already mean to take the land and not the money." Thomas leaned in. "Go on. And the date." Her finger moved. "This note's dated the 9th of October, 2 years back. You said your ma passed—" Caleb's voice was very quiet. "Spring. Your pa signed it. This says he signed it in October." "In October," Ellie said, "when Carter just told us your pa was so broke down with grief he'd sign anything. But October's near half a year after. And I'll tell you something else." She straightened up. "This ink, the signature ink and the body ink, they ain't the same age. The writin' of the note's browned some. The signature's blacker, fresher." She looked at Caleb dead on. "Somebody wrote up this note a long while back and only signed your father's name to it recent. Real recent. Like maybe after he was already in the ground and couldn't say otherwise." "That's a guess," Samuel said, but his voice had no fight in it. He wanted her to be right so bad it hurt to watch. "You're guessing about ink. Am I? Ellie tilted the paper toward the window light. Then look here, boy, and tell me I'm guessing. She pointed to the bottom of the note. Right there. See how the signature runs downhill off the end of the line. A man signs his own name, he's signed it 10,000 times. It comes out level, straight. His hand knows the way without thinking. She traced the mark with a fingernail. This here's careful, slow. Whoever made this was copying watching another signature and drawing it letter by letter like a child at a slate. That's not a man signing. That's a man forging. And he pressed too hard doing it, see the way the pen bit the paper. Your pa never wrote that name. He couldn't have. A dead man's hand don't shake from pressing too careful. Thomas made a sound low in his throat. My God, there's more. Ellie was fully awake now, the storewoman, the ledger reader, 12 years of catching cheats rising up in her like a tide. Carter said the Cheyenne Land and Cattle Company, that the note's held by a company, but a company note's got a company seal, a stamp of witness, a clerk's countersign, 3-4 marks besides the borrower's. This note's got one signature and not another mark on it. No witness, no seal, no clerk. She looked up. No company in this world lends $1,200 on a scrap of paper with one lonely name at the bottom. This wasn't drawn up in an office, gentlemen. This was drawn up on somebody's kitchen table, same as we're sitting at now. Caleb had come around behind her. He wasn't looking at the paper. He was looking at her. You saw all that, he said slowly, sitting across the table, upside down, while Carter was still talking. I did. In the time it took him to gloat. A liar loves the sound of his own voice, Ellie said. Gives an honest woman plenty of time to read his paper. The kitchen had gone dead silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of ruin. The silence of 3 men realizing the woman in their barn might be the most dangerous person in the county. How? Samuel said slowly, and all the hardness had gone out of him, replaced by pure astonishment. Do you know all that? Ellie set the paper down careful. Her hands weren't shaking. His were. Because 'fore I was a woman, folks slept in barns. She said, I kept the books for my father's dry goods store. 12 years. Every note, every debt, every crooked drummer who came through trying to cheat a country storekeeper out of his money. I read men's paper for a livin' Mr. Walker, and I'm telling you this paper is a lie. It's a good lie, best I've seen, but it's a lie. Caleb stood up out of his chair. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her, and he looked at her the way you'd look at water in the desert. Say it plain, he said. Can you prove that in front of a judge? Ellie held his eyes. I don't know, she said honestly. Proving it's a whole other mountain from seeing it. I'd need your pa's real signatures to set beside it. Old letters. A deed, a Bible, anything he truly signed. I'd need to find where this note was recorded and by who. And I'd need time, Caleb, which that man just told us we've got 30 days of. But it can be done. It can be tried. Caleb Walker was quiet a long moment. Then he did something Ellie would remember the rest of her days. He took off his hat. He took off his hat to her in his own kitchen, the way a man does to somebody he's decided is worth more than he first reckoned. And Thomas rose to his feet, and after a beat so did Samuel, who'd had a rifle to her head at sunrise. Ma'am, Caleb said. An hour ago I gave you a plate of eggs 'cause it was the decent thing to do. I didn't do it looking for anything back. He turned the hat in his hands. But it seems the good Lord's got a sense of humor sending the one person in Montana who can read that devil's papers straight into our barn the very morning he brought it. So I'm going to ask you something, and you're free to say no. And it won't change that you've got a roof here, long as you want one storm or no storm. Ask it, Ellie said. Stay, not till the road clears. Stay and help us fight this. We can't pay you but in food and shelter, and whatever's left of this place if we win it. It ain't much. It might be nothing in 30 days. His jaw set. But I'd rather go down swinging beside somebody who knows how to swing than sell out clean to a liar and call it sense. Ellie looked at the 3 of them. 3 brothers, about to lose the only home they had. 3 men who'd fed her, warmed her, stepped in front of her, taken their hats off to her, all before the morning was rightly old. And she thought about all the towns that had shut their doors, all the folks who'd decided in one glance that a woman her size was a burden and not a blessing, a mouth to feed and never a mind to reckon with. And here were 3 cowboys who'd looked past all of that in the space of 1 hour because she'd read them a piece of paper. Something in her chest that had been frozen a long, long time began very slowly to thaw. "I lost my store," she said quietly, "to a man just like Carter. Papers I couldn't fight in a town that wouldn't stand with me. I walked out of that town with 1 bag and no home, and I've been walking ever since telling myself the world was cruel clean through and there wasn't a decent soul left in it worth stopping for." She looked up. "Seems I was wrong about that." Caleb waited. "I'll stay," Ellie said. "And I'll fight your paper, Caleb Walker. I'll fight it with everything I've got left, which the Lord knows ain't much. But you listen to me now, all 3 of you." She squared her shoulders, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt tall. "I have been laughed at, and turned out, and stepped over and underestimated by every man from here to the Missouri. So the one thing I will not abide not for one day I'm under this roof is being underestimated again. You want my help, you treat my word like it counts." Samuel spoke up, and his young voice was rough with something like shame. "I had a gun to your head this morning." "You did." He struggled with it. "I'm sorry for it, ma'am, truly." Ellie looked at the boy a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of her mouth turned up. "Point a gun at me again, Samuel Walker, and I'll do your sum so wrong come tax time the government'll take what Carter don't." She held out her hand. "But apology accepted. Shake on it. We're gonna be family 30 days, whether the 4 of us like it or not." Samuel shook her hand. He almost smiled. Thomas set another log on the fire. "Well," he said, "if we're all family now, family ought to eat proper. And no offense to Sam's cooking, but he burns water." "I do not." "You do," Caleb and Thomas said together. And for one moment, one small, warm, unlikely moment, while the rain came down and a forged note sat drying on the table, and 30 days ticked away toward ruin, the kitchen at Black Creek Ranch filled up with the sound of something none of them had heard in it since their mother passed. Laughter. Ellie tied on an apron she found on a peg by the door. It didn't near fit her, and she didn't care. She rolled up her sleeves. "Samuel, fetch me every scrap of paper in this house your father ever put his hand to. Letters, receipts, the family Bible, anything. Thomas, I'll want to know the name of every man Carter's dealt with crooked in this valley, 'cause a man don't forge one note in a lifetime, he forges a habit of it, and somebody out there's been burned before us." Thomas frowned. "There's the Kellys," he said slowly. "Lost their creek land to Carter 2 summers back. Bank paper nobody could make sense of. And old man Pruitt signed over his south pasture and swore up and down till the day he died he never signed a thing." He looked at her, and understanding dawned in his face like a slow sunrise. "Lord, it's the same play. It's the exact same play he ran on them." "Then those folks are witnesses," Ellie said, "and we're going to need every one of them. A judge might not believe one grievin' family cryin' forgery. He'll have a harder time not believin' 3. She pointed at Thomas. "Find them. Quiet. Carter's already got the town whisperin' about a strange woman up at Black Creek. Don't give him more to whisper about than he's already earned. Caleb." She stopped, turned to him. "Caleb, I need the truth. All of it. Your pa's debts, your pa's grief, everything Carter might twist. If we're going to prove that paper's a lie, I can't have a single true thing jumping out to surprise me in front of a judge. You understand?" "I understand," he said. "You'll have all of it, Miss Ellie. Every word." The others had gone, Samuel off to hunt down his father's papers, Thomas out to see about the horses, spooked by the storm. For a moment, it was only the 2 of them in the kitchen, Caleb and the woman who'd slept in his barn. He lowered his voice. "I have to ask you something, and I'd ask it where the boys can't hear." He turned his hat in his hands. You truly believe we can win this? Or are you telling three desperate men what they need to hear so they don't lie down and quit? Ellie considered him. It would have been easy to comfort. She'd been comforted with pretty lies herself, and she knew exactly how empty they left a body. I'll give you the truth, she said, since you asked for it plain. I believe that paper's a forgery deep in my bones. I'd stake my life on it. But belief don't win in a courtroom, Caleb. Proof wins. And Nathaniel Carter's got money, and money buys clerks and judges and time, and we've got 30 days and a big woman who reads ledgers. She held his eyes. So here's the honest answer. We can win, but it ain't likely, and I won't pretend it is. Caleb was quiet. Why help us then, he said, if it ain't likely? Because a man just walked in here and tried to steal a home from folks who fed a stranger with the last of their salt pork. Her voice went hard and low. I know exactly how that feels, Caleb Walker. I've stood where you're standing. And there was nobody in my corner when it happened to me, not one soul who'd read my paper or stand at my shoulder. So I lost. She lifted her chin. You've got somebody now. You've got me. It ain't likely. But it ain't nothing either, and I've won longer odds than this before I ever picked up a bag and started walking. Something moved behind Caleb's eyes. He looked at her the way a man looks at solid ground after a long time at sea. All right, he said quiet. All right then. We fight. We fight, Ellie agreed. Ellie, she added a beat later. If I'm fighting for your home, you can drop the miss. Ellie, he said, and it was strange how her name sounded in his mouth, like it belonged there, like it had been waiting a long time to be said kind. Outside, the storm broke apart at last, and a thin blade of sunlight came down through the clouds and fell across the ranch yard across the barn, where a homeless woman had curled up in the hay a few hours before, sure the world had no place left in it for her. She didn't see the light. She was too busy working. But Caleb saw it. Caleb stood at the window with the forged note in one hand and watched that light lay itself down over Black Creek. And for the first time since the paper came, he let himself believe they might not lose it after all. Then he turned from the window, put down the note, and went to fetch his father's letters for the woman who was going to save his home. None of them said it out loud. None of them would have known how. But every soul in that kitchen felt the same thing settle over them as the morning turned toward noon, the plain, quiet, unaccountable sense that something had changed, that a door had opened, that the four of them thrown together by a storm and a lie and a plate of eggs had become without meaning to, and without warning, exactly what each of them had been missing. Ellie Whitmore had walked into that valley with nothing. By the time the sun stood high, she had a table of fight, 3 men at her back, and a reason to stop walking. She had, though she didn't dare call it by its name just yet, the beginnings of a home. And she was not from that day forward going to let anybody take it from her without the hardest fight of their crooked lives. The days that followed were not gentle. Ellie had been given the smallest room at the back of the house, a room that smelled of cedar and old leather and the particular stillness of a space that hadn't been opened in a while. She didn't ask whose it had been. The faded calico curtain on the window, folded too neat by a woman's hands, told her enough. She spread the papers Samuel had gathered across the kitchen table before the brothers were up and set to work by lamplight, the way she used to do back when the store was alive and the mornings belonged to her and the ledgers and the quiet. The Walker family had kept good records. James Walker, the father, was a meticulous man. Every purchase, every trade, every handshake and deal written down in a small leather book in precise, careful script. Ellie turned the pages, and she felt the shape of the man through his handwriting steady, unhurried the pen of somebody who took his time, because he believed the details mattered. She set that ledger beside Carter's note. Then she held both up to the lamp. Even without the ink-age difference, she'd already spotted the two signatures weren't close. Not really. Carter's forger had gotten the general shape of the letters right, the curve of the J, the wide swing of the W, the small descending hook at the end of the name. But James Walker's real signature, repeated 100 times through the ledger, pressed light on the upstrokes and heavy on the down. The habit of a man who'd learned penmanship from a schoolteacher who believed in discipline. The forgery pressed uniformly, heavy everywhere, careful everywhere. A copy, not a habit. Lord, Ellie breathed. He didn't even try to learn the man's hand. He just traced the shape of it. What does that mean? She startled. Caleb was in the doorway, dressed holding 2 cups of coffee. She hadn't heard him come in. It means Carter used somebody who knew what a signature ought to look like, but didn't know your father well enough to fake how he wrote. She accepted the cup he offered. Which means the forger wasn't from around here. A local man would have seen your pa's hand on 100 documents. He'd have known the difference. Caleb sat down across from her. Carter hired somebody from outside the valley. Somebody he trusted enough to commit a crime for him. That kind of trust isn't bought, it's grown. Family, maybe. Or a man who's been on Carter's payroll long enough to be in deep. Dillard Ellison, Caleb said, and his jaw set hard. Thomas mentioned that name. Said he witnessed the Kellys' note, too. He's Carter's wife's cousin. Works out of a back room on 2nd Street, calls himself a notary. County doesn't recognize him. He's not on the official rolls, but half the valley doesn't know that, and Carter's been using him for years. Caleb's cup came down flat on the table. We thought it was irregular, not criminal. We should have looked harder. You didn't know you needed to. Ellie smoothed the ledger page flat. People don't go hunting evidence of crimes that haven't happened yet, but now it has happened. And Ellison's name is going to be a problem for Carter if we can put him in front of a real judge. That's the part that worries me, Caleb said. The real judge. Circuit judge comes through in 6 weeks. Carter knows every man who holds a gavel in this county. Then we go outside the county, Ellie said simply. But first we go talk to the Kellys. Caleb looked at her over the rim of his cup. You don't rest much, do you, Ellie? Something warm moved through his voice when he said her name, like it settled there naturally without effort. She noticed it, and she filed the noticing away somewhere she didn't look at directly. I rested 9 days' worth in that barn, she said. I figure I've got the credit. Thomas drove the wagon into Harrow Creek with Ellie on the bench beside him, and she felt the town's eyes before they were halfway down the main street. It wasn't the sharp stare of people who'd seen something wrong. It was the slower, heavier gaze of people who'd already made up their minds about what they were looking at, and were waiting for their opinion to be confirmed. A woman outside the mercantile stopped sweeping. 2 men leaning on a post straightened up. A girl pulled a younger child by the arm and turned them both away, as if looking were catching. Thomas kept his eyes forward. Don't pay it any mind. I'm not, Ellie said. And she meant it. She'd been stared at so long she barely felt it anymore. What she felt instead was something colder and more useful, the assessment. Watching who stared and who didn't. Watching who looked uncomfortable rather than hostile. Those were the people Carter hadn't gotten to yet. 2 doors down on the left, Thomas said quietly. Feed store. Man named Carver runs it. He's cautious, but he's honest. He'll know where the Kellys went after they lost the creek land. Thomas went in. Ellie waited on the bench, and she was aware of the woman across the street who hadn't stopped watching her since the wagon pulled up, a broad-shouldered woman in a gray dress. Arms crossed, chin lifted, with the particular expression of a person who has appointed herself the moral standard of a community and finds it an exhausting but necessary calling. The woman crossed the street. Ellie let her come. You'd be the woman staying up at Black Creek, the woman said. It wasn't a question. I would, Ellie said pleasantly. I'm Vera Higgins. My husband's on the town council. Good to know, Mrs. Higgins. Vera's eyes moved over Ellie the way hands go through a peddler's wares, brisk assessing, looking for the flaw. I'll say it plain since nobody else seems to want to. It ain't right. A woman alone living with 3 unmarried men. Whatever your story is, it reflects on those boys, and this town watches out for the Walker family. Watches out for them, Ellie repeated. That's what I said. Funny way of showing it. Ellie kept her voice even, and her hands loose in her lap. Because those boys are about to lose Black Creek to a forged debt note, and I haven't seen this town riding out to help them with it. I haven't seen this town doing much of anything except standing on its porch and talking about the big woman in the wagon. She tilted her head. So, if you're truly watching out for the Walker family, Mrs. Higgins, you'd do better watching out for me, because I'm the one trying to save what they've got." Vera Higgins opened her mouth. Nothing came out for a full 3 seconds. Her chin dropped a fraction. "A forged note," she said, finally quieter. "Forged. Filed through a man who isn't a legitimate notary. Part of a pattern Carter's run on at least 3 families in this valley that I can prove so far." Ellie held the woman's eyes. "Which means anybody with land Carter wants is at risk, including, I'd reckon, a town councilman's holdings." Vera stood very still. The color moved in her face like weather. Then she turned and walked away without another word, and Ellie watched her go, and noted that she walked fast the way a woman walks when she's got somewhere urgent to be. Thomas came back out of the feed store. He saw Vera's retreating back and looked at Ellie. "What'd you say to her?" "Planted a seed," Ellie said. "Drive." The Kelly place sat 2 miles past the old mill on the Reedside Road. Patrick Kelly opened his door 3 inches and no more. He was a lean, gray-haired man with the posture of someone who'd spent years bending and hadn't fully straightened since. He looked at Thomas first, then at Ellie, and his eyes went guarded in the specific way of a man who has been burned bad enough to mistake warmth for fire. "Thomas Walker," he said. Flat. Not unfriendly, but not open. "Mr. Kelly, this is Ellie Whitmore. She's staying with us. She reads legal documents, loan notes, deeds filings. She found something in the note Carter brought us, and she believes what he did to your family and ours is the same play run twice." The door didn't open wider, but Patrick Kelly's jaw moved. "I signed that note," he said very quietly. "My hand, my mark. Man's got my signature on it, witnessed and recorded." "Did you sign that note?" Ellie said. "Or did you sign something you were told was something else?" A long beat. The door opened. Martha Kelly was at the back of the room, and she'd been listening since the first knock. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and red-rimmed lids that said she had cried more than she intended to in the last 2 years, and was now done with it. When Patrick opened the door, she was already moving toward the box under the bed, and she had it out and open before anyone had sat down. "I kept a copy," she said, holding out a folded envelope. From the very first meeting, Carter came back 6 months later with what he called the official version. Patrick said I was foolish to bother. I kept it anyway. Her chin went up. 32 years that land was in this family. I figured the truth of it deserved to be somewhere Carter couldn't reach. Ellie unfolded the paper. She read it once. Then she read it again, slowly, and something went very still in the center of her chest. "Thomas," she said carefully. "You have the Walker note. Inside coat pocket. Put them side by side." He did. And the 3 of them, Ellie Thomas, Martha Kelly, stood over those 2 pieces of paper and saw it at the same time. Different handwriting, different ink, different paper stock. 2 notes supposedly produced by the same company for 2 different families, and they didn't match in a single physical detail. "He didn't use one forger," Ellie said. "He used at least 2. Martha sat down hard in her chair. "He made a business of it. A system," Ellie said. "Different men to produce different documents, so if one gets caught, the others can't be traced back to a single hand. But there's one fixed point." She looked up. "Mrs. Kelly, the name on your note as the recording witness, was it Dillard Ellison?" Martha's eyes went wide. "How do you know that name?" "Because it's on our note too." Ellie straightened up. "Carter uses different forgers so the handwriting never matches. But every note goes through Ellison for the county recording. He's the hub. You prove Ellison isn't a legitimate notary, which he isn't. He's not on the county rolls. You don't just break one note. You break all of them. Every land deal Carter's run through Ellison falls apart at once." The room went quiet. Then Patrick Kelly, who'd been standing in the corner with his arms crossed and his face shut since they walked in, uncrossed his arms. "What do you need from us?" he said. "A sworn statement," Ellie said. "Your original note, your story, Your signatures witnessed by someone who isn't connected to Carter. And your willingness to stand up in front of a commissioner and say it out loud. Patrick and Martha Kelly looked at each other. It was the look of two people who have been living with a wound long enough to know exactly what it costs to open it back up. "We'll do it," Martha said. Patrick nodded once, slow and final. Ellie looked at the two of them, at the stripped-down room. At the box Martha was already putting back under the bed, slow and careful, the way you handle the last things you have left. "I want you to understand something," Ellie said. "When we go to the commissioner, Carter is going to do everything in his power to make your family look like trouble. Disgruntled losers, bad debtors. He's going to say you signed freely and spent the cash and then had regrets." She held Martha's eye. "He's going to try to shame you. Can you stand that?" Martha Kelly lifted her chin, and her voice was quiet and iron all the way through. "I have been shamed already, Miss Whitmore. By the man by this town, by every neighbor who looked the other way when we packed our things. I have been shamed till there's nothing left of it to sting." She reached out and covered Patrick's hand on the table. "What I haven't been is heard, so yes, we can stand it." Ellie nodded. "Then we'll get you heard." They were 3 miles from home when Thomas pulled the wagon up short. Samuel was on the road ahead of them walking, or trying to, one hand pressed to his ribs and his hat pulled low, but even from a distance the stiffness in his gait was plain. Thomas was down from the bench before the wagon fully stopped. "Sam." Samuel lifted his head. His left eye was swollen near shut, and there was dried blood at the corner of his mouth. "I'm fine," he said immediately, the reflex of a younger brother. "You are not fine," Ellie said from the bench. "I went to the courthouse." He let Thomas take his arm, didn't fight it the way he would have 2 days ago. "Check the recording records for the Walker note like you said. The clerk let me look, it was there, filed under Carter's name exactly as written. But while I was in there I copied something down." He reached into his coat with his good hand and came out with a folded page, slightly crumpled. "Dillard Ellison's name is on 7 different filings in the last 4 years. 7 different properties, all originally owned by families who don't hold the land 2 years later." Ellie took the paper. 7. 7 I could find. Could be more. He touched his jaw, winced. 2 of Carter's boys caught me on the way out. Said next time I set foot in a county office asking questions they'd do considerably worse. The good eye found Ellie. They said to tell the woman to get back on the road where she came from, before she found out what happens to strays that overstay their welcome. Thomas made a sound low in his throat that wasn't a word. Ellie folded the paper and tucked it inside her own coat without speaking. "Get up on the bench," she told Samuel. "You're riding home." "I can walk." "You can walk when your ribs aren't cracked. Get up." He got up. And Ellie sat between the brothers for the rest of the drive home and didn't speak. Her hands were still in her lap, very still, in the way of someone who has swallowed something that would burn coming back up and has decided it will not come back up. She wasn't afraid. That was the thing she turned over in her mind and examined carefully. She was not afraid. She was cold and focused and more alert than she'd been in years. Because Carter had just told her exactly how worried he was. Men who aren't worried don't send boys to beat a young cowboy on a public road in broad daylight. Men who aren't worried don't threaten women by name. Carter was scared of what she'd found, and frightened men made mistakes, and all she had to do was keep working until he made one she could use. Caleb met them in the yard. The look on his face when he saw Samuel's eye went through 3 different kinds of fury in about 2 seconds. He got his brother inside, got him sat down, and by the time Ellie had laid out everything, the Kelly note, the matching witness name, Samuel's 7 filings, the courthouse threat, Caleb had gone the specific shade of quiet that meant he was holding himself in with both hands. "I'm riding into town," he said. "No, you're not," Ellie said. "He put his hands on my brother. And he wants you to ride into town over it. He wants you angry and swinging because an angry man who throws a punch gives Carter exactly what he needs, a reason to have you jailed and off this land for the next 2 weeks while his clock runs out." She kept her voice level. "You understand what I'm telling you?" Caleb's fists uncurled, slowly. He's counting on you to act like a man with a grudge, she said. Don't. Act like a man who's going to win. The room went tight. Then Thomas said very quiet, She's right. I know she's right, Caleb said roughly. He turned away from them and stood with his back to the room for a long moment. When he turned back, the fury was still there, but it was lower banked, controlled. All right. What's the next move? Tomorrow, I sit with everything we've got. All 7 filings, both notes your pa's ledger, the Kelly copy. I need to build out the full pattern before we decide how to take it to a commissioner. She looked at him steadily. And Carter, we let him wait. We let him wonder why we haven't panicked. Men like Carter are used to winning fast. Every family he's run this play on has either sold quick or collapsed quick. We do neither, and that'll start to make him nervous. A nervous Carter makes mistakes. He made his first one the following afternoon. He rode up to Black Creek with 2 men at his back and a document in his gloved hand. And this time, he didn't knock. He opened the door and walked in, like the ranch was already his, and Ellie, sitting at the table, didn't move a muscle. I believe, Carter said pleasantly, looking around at the 4 of them. We've had a misunderstanding. We're past misunderstandings, Caleb said from the doorway. I've been too patient. Carter set a document on the table in front of Ellie and spread it flat with 2 fingers. I thought I'd spare the boys the pain of the whole picture, seeing as we were still in the neighborly stage. But since you've decided to dig in, he smiled, I figure you ought to see what you're actually dealing with. Ellie looked at the paper. It was a bill of sale. The East Pasture, 48 acres of the best Walker grassland, supposedly sold by James Walker to the Cheyenne Land and Cattle Company 3 years ago. Cash transaction. Witnessed by Dillard Ellison. Signed by James Walker in the same heavy-pressed, uniformly careful forgery hand as the loan note. Your pa sold that land, Carter said. Used the cash to carry the ranch through the bad year. The loan note was supposed to be the backup position when the ranch went under. Anyway, I was willing to let it go quiet. But since you want to make this loud and public, he spread his hands. We go loud and public, and the East Pasture reverts to me as prior owner independent of the note. You beat the loan in court, fine. You still lose the pasture, and the pasture's where your water rights sit. No water rights, the rest of the land's worthless in a dry summer. He looked directly at Ellie. Which you'd know if you truly understood this valley. The room didn't move. Ellie stared at the bill of sale. 2 documents, 2 different handwriting styles, 1 witness on both. And he'd kept the second one back until now, laid it on the table when he felt the pressure building. That was the mistake, not the document itself, but the timing. A man who is confident doesn't reveal his reserve hand in the middle of a negotiation. He saves it for court. Carter had just shown it because he was rattled. You're scared, she said. Carter's pleasant expression didn't shift. I beg your pardon. You kept this document in your pocket until today. You said yourself you were going to let the loan go quiet. Ellie looked at him with the same steady attention she gave the papers. But something we did in the last 2 days changed your calculation. Was it the Kellys, or was it Samuel going to the courthouse? The smile went smaller, only a fraction. But she saw it. I'd be very careful, Carter said softly, about what you think you know, Miss Whitmore. I know Dillard Ellison's name is on 7 county filings in 4 years, Ellie said. I know he's not a recognized notary in this county. I know you used at least 2 different men to produce your forgeries so they couldn't be traced to one hand. And I know that the Kellys kept their original note and it doesn't match the Walker note in a single physical detail, which means your system didn't just produce 1 crime. It produced a pattern. She folded her hands on the table. And patterns are what commissioners look for, Mr. Carter. Not 1 note, not 1 family. The whole picture. Silence settled over the room. Carter looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Caleb with the measured patience of a man repositioning a chess piece. She's going to get you all ruined, he said, quiet and certain. She doesn't understand this valley. She doesn't understand who I know or what I can bring down on this land with 1 conversation in the right office. And when it all falls apart, She'll walk back out on that road, and you'll be the ones left holding nothing." He picked up the bill of sale. "Last offer. I walk away from the loan note entirely. You keep the main house and the north acres. In exchange, the east pasture signs over to me clean, and this woman is off your land by tomorrow morning." Samuel, still sitting with his bruised eye and his taped ribs, said, "Go to hell." Carter blinked at the youngest brother. "Language," Thomas said mildly, though he didn't look displeased about it at all. Caleb straightened off the door frame. "You heard him. Get off my land, Carter. Don't come back without a court order, because the next time you walk through that door without one, I won't be responsible for what happens." Carter's face went smooth and blank. He settled his hat. 15 days, he said at the door. "Clock's running." The horses left the yard. The room breathed again. Ellie let out a long, careful exhale and picked up Carter's bill of sale, which he'd left behind on the table. She noted that with quiet satisfaction and added it to her stack. "You turned him down flat," she said to Caleb. "We turned him down," Caleb said. He pulled out a chair and sat down hard across from her elbows on the table, and for the first time he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "So you better be right about what you found, Ellie. We just burned the last road out." "I know." "Are you right?" She held his eyes without flinching. "I'm right about the evidence, right about Ellison, right about the pattern." She paused. "But I haven't told you the hardest part yet." Caleb went very still. "What's the hardest part?" "We can prove the notes are forged. We can prove Ellison isn't legitimate. But proof needs a judge who'll hear it, and every judge in this county knows Carter." She set her hands flat on the table. "We need to go over all of them. A federal land office challenge filed directly with the Territorial Land Commissioner. It bypasses the local courts entirely. The Territorial Commissioner answers to Washington, not to Harrow Creek." She watched his face. "It's a harder road, longer road. Probably costs money we don't have, but it's the one road Carter can't buy his way across." "That's right." Caleb stared at her. "You knew this from the beginning. I suspected it from the beginning. I know it now." She kept her voice even. "Yesterday we had a feeling. Today we have the Kelly's Note 7 filings, 2 documents with the same false witness, and a man who just panicked and showed us his second card 15 days before he had to. Today we have a case." She held his eyes. "There's a difference between a feeling and a case, Caleb. I don't bring you feelings. I bring you evidence. When I had evidence, I told you." The silence between them stretched. Then slowly, something in the tight line of his shoulders let go. "All right," he said. "Tell me about the land commissioner." He went to bed late. They all did. And when the house finally went quiet and the lamp in the hall burned down to nothing, Ellie was still at the table alone with everything spread out before her. The 2 Walker documents, the Kelly note, Samuel's list of 7 filings, James Walker's ledger, and a rough map Thomas had sketched of every property in the valley that had changed hands in 5 years. She worked. The pattern was there. She could feel it the way you feel a loose thread on a garment, a small snag, and if you pull it right, the whole seam comes apart. Ellison was the thread. 7 filings, 7 families. She needed the dates in order the amounts compared the sequence of Carter's acquisitions mapped against the seasons and the hard years. Because a man like Carter didn't move randomly. He moved on weakness, on drought, years and winter kills, and the grief of men who'd just buried their wives. She was so deep in it that she nearly missed the thing she'd been looking for without knowing she was looking for it. The family Bible sat at the edge of the table where she'd pushed it that morning after checking the marriage record for the father's signature. She'd gotten what she needed and forgotten it. It fell. She caught it by reflex, and as she straightened it back up, the cover fell open, and a folded paper dropped out of the inside front pocket. The small sewn leather pocket that old Bibles sometimes had, meant for a family record, or a lock of a child's first hair. She picked it up, unfolded it, read it again slowly with the lamp tilted close. James Walker had written it in March of 1884, more than 2 years before his death. It was not addressed to anyone. It was the kind of writing a man does when he needs to put something down, in case he isn't around to say it out loud. Carter made an offer on the east pasture. $400, which is less than half what it's worth, and he knows it. I refused him. He didn't take it well. Told me I'd come to regret holding out. I don't know what kind of man makes a threat like that over a piece of grass, but I know the kind of man who doesn't forget a refusal. I'm writing this down so the truth of it exists somewhere. If anything ever comes up about that land, any paper, any claim, any sale, it is a lie. I have never sold the east pasture, and I never will. It belongs to my boys when I'm gone free and clear of any obligation, and anyone who says different is either mistaken or a thief. James Walker, March 12, 1884. Ellie set the paper down. Her hand was not entirely steady. James Walker had known. 2 years before the forgeries, 2 years before the note and the bill of sale, and Carter's smooth smile, and the 15-day clock, this man had seen Nathaniel Carter coming. Had looked at him across a refused offer and understood what he was dealing with. And he'd written down the truth and tucked it into the family Bible because a careful man, a meticulous man, a man who kept every purchase and every trade in a ledger, understood that truth without a record is just a story. The father hadn't just died and left his boys a problem. He'd left them the answer. And it had been sitting on a shelf unread for 2 years while Carter schemed and forged and waited for the right moment. Ellie pressed her hand flat over the paper. She stayed that way for a moment, just breathing, because something about it hit her somewhere deep and private. The image of a man writing a warning in a Bible by lamplight trying to protect his sons from across whatever was coming. She'd had a father who loved her like that. She'd lost him too, and nobody had left her a letter. She picked up the paper and crossed the hall and knocked on Caleb's door, light but firm. "Caleb," she said through the wood. "Wake up. Your father left you something." A beat of silence. Then the sound of him moving boots hitting the floor. The door opened, and Caleb Walker stood there in his shirt sleeves, his eyes alert, the way a man's eyes go when he wakes knowing something serious is at hand before he's fully conscious. She held out the letter without a word. He took it, read it by the lamplight that spilled out from the kitchen behind her. She watched his face as he went through it. The stillness first, then the small contraction around his eyes that meant something had found its way past his guard. Then the very long, very quiet exhale of a man absorbing something that is grief and vindication at once. He knew, Caleb said. He knew. 2 years. His voice was low and rough. He's been trying to protect this place for 2 years, and we didn't even know there was anything to protect against. He knew you didn't know. That's why he wrote it down. Ellie kept her voice gentle. Your father was a careful man, Caleb. The most careful man I've found evidence of in a long while. He couldn't predict exactly what Carter would do or when. So he put the truth somewhere it couldn't be lost and hoped his boys would find it if they needed it. She paused. They needed it. Caleb looked at the letter one more time. Then he folded it precise and deliberate the way his father would have, and he held it against his chest for just a moment, not long, just a breath before he set his jaw and looked up. This goes to the commissioner with everything else, he said. Yes, it establishes motive. Carter threatened your father over a refusal, and your father was dead inside 2 years, and 3 months after that, the forged documents appeared. A commissioner worth his office will see exactly what that sequence means. Pa wasn't sick when he died, Caleb said. Heart, the doctor said, just gave out. His eyes were careful now, measuring. You think Carter? I think I don't have evidence of anything beyond forgery, Ellie said, clear and honest, and I won't take you somewhere I can't back up with paper. What I have is a letter that proves your father refused Carter, that Carter threatened him, and that the documents appeared after he was no longer alive to deny them. She held his gaze. That's what we use. That's what we prove. The rest is between Carter and God. Caleb was quiet for the long moment. Then he nodded once, the way his father probably nodded, measured final. She held the letter and waited. And in the quiet of the dark hallway of Black Creek Ranch, with 15 days left on the clock, and a land commissioner 200 miles away, and Nathaniel Carter sleeping somewhere fat and certain in his victory. Ellie Whitmore felt for the first time in years the solid, unmistakable weight of a fight she intended to win. He read it twice. That was all he did. Read it twice, fold it, and hold it against his chest, in that way that told her more than words could have. Then he looked up. "We ride to the commissioner tomorrow," he said. "First light." Ellie agreed. "It's 2 days each way. We'll be back with 4 days left on Carter's clock." He turned the letter in his hands. "Is that enough?" "It has to be." Caleb nodded once, that final nod she was coming to know. Then he looked at her standing in his hallway, in a borrowed apron, with lamplight behind her, and his father's letter in her hands, and something moved through his face that he didn't quite say. "Get some sleep, Ellie," he said finally. "You've earned it." She went back to the table and sat down, but she didn't sleep. She organized every piece of paper into sequence, labeled each one in her clean, precise hand, wrapped them in oilcloth against weather. And only then, with the evidence stacked and secured, did she lay her head on her folded arms for what she told herself would be 10 minutes. It was Thomas who shook her awake. "Rider coming fast." It was barely dawn. The man on the horse was Billy Carver, the feed store owner's son, barely 17, horse-lathered face, pale under his tan. He pulled up in the yard and didn't wait to dismount before he spoke. "Mr. Walker, Carter filed papers with Judge Morrow last night, county court. He's claiming immediate possession of Black Creek on grounds of irreversible default." The boy's voice cracked. "Judge Morrow signed it. Sheriff's got a copy. They're saying you've got until noon today to vacate." The yard went silent. Samuel said very quietly, "He can't do that." "Judge Morrow did," Billy said. "I'm sorry. Pa told me to ride straight out." Ellie was already moving. "What did the filing say exactly? Every word you remember." The boy recited it. He had a good memory, sharp and frightened, and Ellie listened with her eyes closed and her lips pressed together, building the document in her head from his words. "He got the wrong court," she said. Every head turned to her. County court doesn't have jurisdiction over a land note filed with the Territorial Recording Office. The note Carter filed or claimed to file goes through the territorial system, not the county bench. Judge Morrow can sign whatever Carter brings him, but it isn't worth the paper it's on. She opened her eyes. "Carter's trying to panic you into moving before you can think. Don't move. Don't pack a single thing. If the sheriff comes, you tell him calmly and politely that you'll be happy to discuss the matter with the Territorial Land Commissioner, whose jurisdiction this falls under, and that your legal representative has been notified." Thomas blinked. "We don't have a legal representative." "Carter doesn't know that." Caleb held still for exactly 1 second. Then the corner of his mouth moved barely for just a moment. "Billy," he said to the boy, "ride back and tell your father thank you. Tell him what Miss Ellie said word for word. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Good man." He turned to the others. "Same plan. Carter just showed us he's scared enough to file a fraudulent court injunction. That means we're closer than he wants us to be." "Caleb." Thomas was already looking past him toward the road. More company. The wagon coming up the track was a town wagon, the kind a merchant drives, with a woman in the bench seat and 2 men on horseback alongside. Ellie didn't recognize the wagon, but she recognized Vera Higgins on the bench, sitting straight-backed and purposeful in her gray dress, her chin at the angle of a woman who has made up her mind and intends to say so. The wagon stopped. Vera climbed down without waiting for help. "I've been talking to my husband," she announced to the yard. "And my husband has been talking to Marcus Higgins, not Morrow. That man's in Carter's pocket, and everybody in this valley knows it. Marcus Higgins, who sits on the Territorial Appeals Board. And I have been talking to Agnes Pruitt." A small older woman climbed carefully down from the back of the wagon, white-haired, deliberate, with the kind of stillness that comes from having lived long enough to not waste motion on anything. "Mrs. Pruitt," Ellie said carefully. "Your husband was one of Carter's first," Agnes Pruitt said. "Lost the South Pasture 4 years ago. Enoch swore till his dying day he never signed a sale. I believed him then. I believe him now." She held out an envelope. "This is a bank receipt." Cash deposit $212 dated the same week Carter claims Enoch received cash payment for the land. If Carter paid him for that land, why was Enoch depositing money at the bank the same week a man doesn't deposit what he just received? He deposits what he's had a long time and finally saved enough of. Ellie took the envelope and opened it. Looked at the receipt. Looked at the date. Looked at Agnes Pruitt. "Would you be willing to swear to this before a commissioner?" she said. Agnes Pruitt drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't much but felt considerable. "Miss Whitmore, I have been waiting 4 years for somebody to ask me that question." Vera Higgins was already talking to Caleb in a low, urgent voice. "My husband contacted Judge Harrison Wallace. He's the circuit judge coming through not in 6 weeks, Caleb, in 8 days. Carter had bad information or someone gave him the wrong dates deliberately because Harrison Wallace is no friend of Nathaniel Carter's and Carter doesn't know it." She paused. "My husband went to school with Wallace. He's honest in the old-fashioned way that makes lawyers nervous. He's agreed to hear preliminary evidence the day he arrives." 8 days. Ellie looked at Caleb. He looked at her. 8 days was not 30 days. It was a different kind of pressure, entirely tighter and sharper, and suddenly real, in a way the 30-day clock hadn't been. "We don't ride to the territorial commissioner," she said, her mind already reorganizing. "We get everything in front of Judge Wallace when he arrives. Every piece of paper, every witness, the Kellys, Mrs. Pruitt, the 7 filings, your father's letter, all of it laid out so clean a man can follow it in one sitting." She turned to Vera. "Can your husband get word to Wallace about what we have? So he arrives prepared to hear it, and Carter can't claim he needs more time to respond." Vera Higgins allowed herself a very small, precise smile. "My husband sent that letter 2 days ago." For a moment the yard stood still in the particular way of people absorbing a turn they didn't see coming. Then Samuel said barely above a whisper, "Carter doesn't know." "He thinks the judge isn't coming for 6 weeks, Thomas said. "He thinks he has time," Caleb said quietly. "He doesn't?" Ellie said, and something in her chest clicked into place clean and certain the way a well-kept lock closes. "He filed that fraudulent injunction this morning because he thought he had weeks to let it sit. He's going to be completely unprepared when Wallace rides in. 8 days. She looked at Caleb. "We keep this quiet. We prepare. We don't give Carter a single sign that we know about the judge. When Wallace arrives, Carter walks into that courthouse blind." They almost made it. The trouble started on the 6th day in the late afternoon when the air changed. Thomas noticed it first. He came in from the paddock with his eyes on the horizon and that particular look on his face that had nothing to do with Carter or judges. "Smoke," he said. It was 40 miles out and moving. Dry lightning the night before, no rain behind it 6 weeks without real moisture in the grass. The kind of fire that starts small and then decides to run, and by the time you smell it properly, the decision's already been made. Caleb was on the porch in 30 seconds. He looked at the sky the way a man born to this land reads it, finding the truth in the small things, the color and the angle of the smoke and the way the animals had gone still in the paddock. "It's coming toward us," he said. "Southeast wind. That puts it at Black Creek in 3 hours, maybe less." "The cattle," Thomas said. "The grain storage," Samuel said. "The horses in the east barn," Caleb said, and he was already moving. Ellie stood in the kitchen doorway with the oilcloth-wrapped evidence package in her arms. She looked at it, the Walker forgery, the Kelly note, Agnes Pruitt's receipt, Samuel's list of 7 filings, James Walker's Bible letter. Everything they had. The entire case against Nathaniel Carter on a kitchen table in the path of a grass fire. She tucked the package under her arm, went to the porch and set it on the highest shelf inside the stone-walled root cellar at the back of the house, the one place on the property fire couldn't reach. Then she went back outside. "What do you need?" she said to Caleb. He was pulling the water line from the pump hands, working fast. "Get back inside, Ellie. This is ranch work. I grew up on a farm in Kansas," she said. "I have fought 3 grass fires. What do you need?" He looked at her. 1 second. Then he was back to the line. "The irrigation channel on the east side. Gate lever 30 yards north of the big cottonwood stump. Open it, and it'll flood the east field, give us a fire break between the barn and the house. Lever sticks. It's heavy. I'll manage it, she said. The cattle gap at the south fence. Caleb's head came up. Third post from the gate, she said. I saw it when Thomas took me to town. If the cattle panic, they'll find that gap and scatter straight into the fire line. Somebody needs to be at that gap before the smoke hits them. Thomas, Caleb called across the yard. South fence third post, get there first. Thomas changed direction without breaking stride. Yes, ma'am. And that was how it began. Ellie ran the irrigation lever herself. Caleb was right. It was heavy, frozen with disuse. The kind of metal that's forgotten. It's supposed to move. She put both hands on it, then her shoulder, then everything she had. And she was not small, and she had worked harder than this in worse places. And the lever gave, with a sound like something tearing, and the water came fast and cold and soaked her to the knee inside a minute, and she was already moving back toward the house. She got up on the roof with the water barrel and the broom wetting down the shingles, the way her father had taught her. And she was working too hard to notice when the first wagons came up from the road, the McGraths and the Carvers and Abe Tillman, who hadn't ridden fast in 10 years, all of them drawn by the smoke column. She noticed when they stopped and looked up at her. She noticed the long beat of silence. Then Abe Tillman said loud and carrying, "Well, what does she need us to do?" "Mr. Tillman?" Ellie called down from the roof. "I need 2 men on that east field line keeping the fire break clear, 2 more at the water pump running buckets to the south side of the house. Anybody with horses, I need them at the cattle gap on the south fence. Thomas is there alone." She pointed. "And somebody get that grain store door open and the sacks moved to the root cellar because that door faces southeast, and if the wind shifts, we lose the whole winter's feed." People moved. They just moved. Nobody questioned it. Nobody looked to the Walker brothers for confirmation. Nobody stood around deciding. McGrath took the east field. Carver's boy took the pump. Abe Tillman himself, 10 years past hard riding, went for the south fence with 2 others behind him. Vera Higgins climbed down from her wagon seat and rolled up her sleeves without being asked. After that, there were enough hands. 2 hours in with the fire visible on the south ridge and the smoke so thick it tasted like copper. Thomas came at a dead sprint across the yard. "East barn," he said, barely getting the words out. 3 horses still inside. Smoke's too thick, they won't come. Caleb was already turning. "I'll go." "The east roof beam is going, Caleb." "I'll go," Caleb said, flat and final. Ellie was down from the house roof before Thomas finished his next breath. She didn't ask permission. She followed Caleb across the yard and through the barn door, and the heat hit her like a wall. Not fire yet, not inside, but close the roaring outside, and smoke rolling in low, and the horses slamming against their stalls in the blind terror that no amount of calm can fully reach. "Get out," Caleb said without looking at her. He had his hands on the first horse's neck, voice low and steady, doing the impossible work of talking an animal past its own survival instinct. "Ellie, get out right now. 2 people is faster than 1, she said, and went to the second stall. She didn't know horses the way Caleb knew horses, but she knew fear knew it from the inside, the way it contracts a body and cuts off thinking. And she knew that fear wants contact, wants something solid that isn't running. She pressed both hands flat to the horse's neck, and she talked. Low and steady, and without urgency, the way you talk to something you intend to get through to whether it believes you yet or not. The horse moved. She got the second one out. Caleb got the first and the third. They were pushing all 3 through the barn door when the east roof beam let go. Not the whole roof at once, just a section, a burning timber coming down on Caleb's side, the crash of it enormous in the enclosed space, and Caleb going to one knee. His left arm caught under the edge of the beam. Not buried, not crushed, but pinned, and the gap in the roof above him opening to the fire outside. "Caleb." Ellie released the horse. It ran. She was back at his side in 4 steps. "I'm all right. Your arm is pinned. I can get it." He pushed up with his free hand. The beam didn't move. "Ellie, you need to—" "Hush," she said, and got both hands under the beam. Later people would ask her how. She didn't have a good answer. The timber wasn't light, and she was not built for lifting, and the smoke was thick enough to blind. She could only tell you that she lifted it, that she put her back and her legs and everything she had into it, and she lifted it, and Caleb pulled his arm free, and the two of them came out of that barn together in a kind of controlled falling. Both coughing hard, Caleb's arm, scraped raw from wrist to elbow but intact, the fire finding the dry straw behind them. The barn went up. The people in the yard saw them come out, and there was a sound. Not a cheer, not words. Just the exhale of 20 people who had been holding their breath all at once. Thomas reached Caleb first, then Samuel, who was supposed to be resting his ribs and wasn't. Vera Higgins was 3 steps behind, and she had her own hands on Caleb's good arm before she seemed to realize she'd moved. Ellie stood with her hands on her knees, coughing smoke out of her lungs. When she straightened up, she found 20 people looking at her. People from the main street of Harrow Creek. People who had stared when she rode in on Thomas's wagon. People who had made their opinion of the big strange woman at Black Creek clear with every turned back and every crossed street. Looking at her differently now, every one of them. She didn't have time to feel it because that was when she saw the horse. Not a ranch horse. A town horse, well fed and well shod, coming up the track at a collected trot with 3 riders behind it. Carter in front. A man in a deputy's badge to his left, and a third man with a document case under his arm who had the practiced look of someone paid to be present at unpleasant events. Carter reined up at the edge of the crowd. He looked at the burning barn. He looked at the gathered neighbors. He looked at Caleb with his arm wrapped and his face smoke dark, and at Ellie standing beside him, and the expression that crossed his face was not surprise. He had timed this. He had sat somewhere and watched the smoke rise, and let the fire do the first part of his work for him. Smoke meant chaos. Chaos meant people off the house. People off the house meant abandonment. He had sat and watched and ridden up at exactly the moment a less careful man might have called too late, and a more careful man would have called too obvious, and Nathaniel Carter had always believed himself to be the one man in any room who had read it exactly right. He still believed it. Ellie could see that in the easy way he held the reins. He hadn't accounted for the crowd. He hadn't accounted for a judge 2 days early. But he still believed right up until this moment that he was the smartest man on this property. "Deputy," he said, pleasant as weather. "We need to serve these papers." Nobody moved to let them through. Carter raised his voice just enough. "Abandonment provision. Under the terms of the note, if the property is vacated by the holders during the redemption period, possession reverts immediately to the note holder. These people left this house during the last 3 hours." He spread his hands. "By law, the property reverts to me as of this moment." The yard went very still. Ellie's mind went faster than she'd ever felt it go. She looked at the deputy's face, uncertain, uncomfortable, and at the document case, and at Carter's attorney, already pulling papers out with the practiced efficiency of a man who expected this to be quick. 1 second. That was all she had. "Nobody left this property," she said loud and clear. "I have been on this roof. Caleb Walker has been in that barn. Thomas Walker has been at the south fence, and Samuel Walker has been at the grain store. Not one of us stepped off this land today. We have been here, every one of us, fighting to save it." "Ma'am, the provision states," the deputy began. "I know what the provision states. And I am telling you with 20 witnesses standing in this yard that the provision has not been triggered." She looked directly at Carter. "You are welcome to argue otherwise in front of a judge. I am looking forward to that conversation." Carter's eyes went careful. "What judge?" he said. Quiet, precise. A new horse came through the gate. Nobody had heard it come up. The crowd was too loud, the fire too close, Carter too focused on the deputy at his shoulder. But the horse was there just inside the gate, and it had been there long enough that its rider had settled into the stillness of someone content to watch and learn the shape of a situation before he announces himself. The man on it was in his 60s, iron-haired with a judge's bearing, and 2 days' worth of travel dust on his coat, and he had clearly been sitting at the edge of the yard long enough to have heard a considerable portion of what had just been said. Judge Harrison Wallace looked at Carter, then at the burning barn, then at the document case in the attorney's hands, then at the 20 citizens of Harrow Creek standing between Carter and the house. "Nathaniel Carter," he said. His voice was dry and even as old timber. "Are you serving abandonment papers on a family while they're fighting a fire on their own land?" It was not a question. Carter's attorney opened his mouth. Wallace looked at him, and the attorney closed it. "I arrived 2 days ahead of schedule," the judge said almost to himself. "Mr. Higgins wrote me a letter." He looked around the yard, at the stone-walled root cellar at the back of the house, its door shut tight. At Agnes Pruitt, standing near the well with the patience of a woman who has waited 4 years. At Thomas, at Samuel, at Caleb with his bandaged arm. At Ellie Whitmore, smoke-stained, soaked to the knee, standing in the middle of a crowd that had finally gotten out of its own way. "I'll hear this case tomorrow morning," Wallace said. 9 o'clock. Harrow Creek Courthouse. Every piece of paper, every witness, every filing, everything. He looked at Carter once more, and the look was the kind that leaves no room for misunderstanding. "You and your attorney will be present. Your notary, Dillard Ellison, will also be present, or I will send the sheriff to collect him personally, and that will not reflect favorably on you." He picked up his reins. "This matter is now under territorial jurisdiction. Sheriff Morrow's county filing is suspended pending my review." He rode through the gate and down the road toward town. The deputy looked at Carter, then at his document case. Then he tucked it under his arm, touched the brim of his hat to the yard in general, and rode after the judge without a word. Carter stood in place for a long moment. The pleasantness was gone entirely. What was there instead was the flat, recalculating expression of a man who has run a careful plan for 2 years and is only now beginning to understand where it went wrong. He turned his horse without speaking and rode out. The yard exhaled. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment. The barn was still smoking. The cattle were scattered across 2 fields. 3 families had spent the last 3 hours working themselves to exhaustion on land that wasn't theirs for people some of them hadn't spoken to kindly in 2 weeks. McGrath came over and shook Caleb's good hand without a word. Then he went back to the water line. A woman Ellie didn't know, young with 2 small children hanging off her skirts, came and stood in front of her with the direct, undecorated gaze of someone who has something to say and doesn't know how. "My husband looked the other way when they said things about you in town," the woman said, "when you came in on the wagon. He didn't say nothing bad himself, but he looked away." A beat. "He's one of the men on your east field line right now. He's been there an hour." She looked down at her children, then back up. "I thought you should know that." Ellie didn't quite know what to say to that either. "Tell him thank you," she said finally. The woman nodded and went back to her children. Samuel made a sound halfway between a laugh and something he couldn't name. Thomas sat down on the fence rail like his legs had held him up long enough and were done. Vera Higgins turned to Agnes Pruitt and put an arm around her shoulders, and Agnes Pruitt, who by all accounts had not cried once in 4 years, pressed one hand hard over her eyes. Caleb stood beside Ellie, closer than the crowd required. She could hear him breathing still rough from the smoke. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. "Are we ready?" Ellie looked at the root cellar. Every page wrapped in oilcloth on a stone shelf where fire couldn't reach it. James Walker's letter folded at the top where she'd placed it 2 years of silence waiting to finally be heard out loud. "Yes," she said. "We're ready." He was quiet for a moment. Around them the neighbors of Harrow Creek moved, dragging water, beating back the last of the embers, doing the long practical work of aftermath. Nobody asked whether to help anymore. "Ellie," Caleb said. "Don't," she said gently. "I know. I don't think you do." His voice was quiet just between the 2 of them. "I found you in my barn with a rifle to your head. I didn't know a single thing about you except that you were hungry and you had holes in your boots and you still looked a man in the eye. And now you've got my family's case in that cellar, and you just walked into a burning building for my brother's horses, and I—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I'm not good with the right words, Ellie. I never have been. But I don't want you to not know it." She looked at him. At the man who had pushed a rifle barrel down in a barn and crouched in the hay and asked her when somebody last offered her a meal. At the man who'd taken his hat off to her in his own kitchen. At a man trying to say something his whole life had never given him the vocabulary for. "I know it," she said softly. "Caleb, I know it." He looked at her a beat longer than he needed to in the settling dark with smoke in the air between them, and she looked back, and neither of them said the next thing that was there to say, because they both understood that tomorrow had to come first. That there was a courthouse waiting. That some things earn the right to be said by being survived first. He nodded. The way his father would have measured and final and meaning more than the motion alone could carry. Around them Harrow Creek worked. The fire was dying. The evidence was safe. The judge was in town. And tomorrow morning, after 2 weeks and a burning barn and a rifle in the hay and a plate of eggs and a Bible letter and 20 neighbors who finally showed up when it counted, Ellie Whitmore was going to walk into a courthouse and tell the truth in front of a man who was ready to hear it. She thought about that as she walked the yard one last time in the near dark, checking what had been saved, what had been lost, what would need to be rebuilt come morning. The barn was gone. That was real. 3 walls still standing, the roof entirely gone, the smell of it in everything. It would cost money and time and labor to put back up, and the Walkers didn't have much of any of those 3 things, but the horses were safe. The grain store was intact. The house stood. The root cellar hadn't so much as gotten warm. And in the root cellar, on a stone shelf in the dark wrapped in oilcloth, James Walker's letter sat beside his son's case and waited for morning. She pressed her hand against the cellar door as she walked past it. Like something worth protecting. Like something that was hers. The morning of the hearing, Ellie was up before the house stirred. She opened the root cellar and laid every document on the kitchen table in the order she'd present them. Forgery evidence first, then the Kelly note for comparison, then the 7, Ellison filings, then Agnes Pruitt's receipt, then the bill of sale. Carter had left behind on their table, like a man dropping a snake, and finally James Walker's letter, which she set apart from the others because it was a different kind of evidence. Not legal proof. Something more than that. She was reviewing her ink comparison notes when Samuel appeared in the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Ask." "Are we going to win?" She looked at him. The youngest brother who'd pointed a rifle at her 2 weeks ago and apologized for it and shaken her hand and not said a cross word to her since. Who'd gone to the courthouse with a bruised eye and come back worse and still handed over every name he'd found. "I don't know," she said honestly. "The evidence is strong. The judge seems fair. But courts are run by people, and people make decisions for all kinds of reasons." She folded her hands on the table. "What I know is that we're walking in there with the truth. And I've found that the truth properly organized is harder to argue against than most people reckon." Samuel was quiet a moment. "What if it's not enough? Then we find the next thing to try, but we don't borrow that trouble before we need it." He nodded. Then he did something she didn't expect, set a hand on her shoulder, brief, and a little awkward the way young men are with gestures, and then took it back. "Pa would have liked you," he said and walked out. Ellie sat for a moment with that. Then she went back to her papers. The Harrow Creek Courthouse was a single-room building with 16 chairs and a raised bench at the front where Judge Wallace sat with his papers spread before him. By 8:45, all 16 chairs were full, and people were standing 3 deep at the back wall. Ellie had not expected that. She'd expected the Walker family and the Kellys and Agnes Pruitt and the cold machinery of a legal proceeding. She had not expected half of Harrow Creek to show up on a Tuesday morning. Vera Higgins was in the second row with her husband. McGrath was there still carrying the smell of smoke from 3 days ago. The young woman with the 2 children was there without the children this time, which meant she'd arranged things so she could be present. Billy Carver sat in the back with his father, and in the far corner, separate from everyone else, hunched in a chair with the posture of a man who would rather be anywhere else on earth sat Dillard Ellison. Ellie clocked him the moment she walked in. She leaned to Thomas. "Ellison's here." "I see him." "Carter brought him." Carter's attorney brought him. Probably figured they could control what he said if they had him in the room. "Or," Ellie said quietly, "Ellison decided to show up on his own, and Carter's attorney doesn't know yet whether that's a good thing or a very bad one." Ellison met her eyes across the room for just a moment. Then he looked away fast. That was the look of a man who had made a decision and wasn't at peace with it yet. Carter arrived at 8:58 with two men at his back, his regular attorney and a second man in a suit that hadn't been bought anywhere near Harrow Creek. The second man carried a leather briefcase worth more than most people in the room made in a month, and he set it on the table across the aisle from Ellie with the practiced calm of someone who does this for a living and wins. Caleb, beside Ellie, looked at the briefcase. "Who is that Cheyenne attorney?" Thomas said, voice flat. "Name's Aldrich. He's handled land disputes for half the cattle barons in the territory." Samuel leaned forward. "Carter brought in a Cheyenne attorney in 8 days. He had him on the way before we knew the judge was coming early," Ellie said quietly. "Carter planned for a fight. He just didn't plan for the fight he's going to get." Judge Wallace called the room to order at 9 o'clock precisely. He was the kind of man who valued time, and the room understood that immediately. "We are here on a matter of contested land title," Wallace said, "specifically the property known as Black Creek Ranch, held in the name of the Walker family against a claim made by Nathaniel Carter through the Cheyenne Land and Cattle Company. I've read the preliminary materials. I am prepared to hear evidence and testimony. We will proceed with efficiency and without theatrics. Is that understood by all parties?" Aldrich rose. He was smooth, unhurried, and his voice carried the polished confidence of a man who'd stood in many rooms more impressive than this one. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I must raise an objection to the opposing party's representation. The Walker family's interests appear to be represented in part by a Miss Eleanor Whitmore, who is not an attorney, who has no legal standing in this matter, and who I am advised was until recently a vagrant with no fixed address and no established connection to the Walker family or to this community." He spread his hands. "I would ask the court to clarify on what basis Miss Whitmore is permitted to present evidence." The room stirred. Judge Wallace didn't look up from his papers immediately. When he did, his expression was unchanged. "Mr. Aldrich, in my courtroom, witnesses testify, and evidence is presented. The qualification I require of a witness is relevant knowledge. The qualification I require of evidence is that it be genuine. I don't require a law degree for either." He looked at Caleb. "Mr. Walker, what is this woman's relationship to your family?" Caleb stood. He didn't look at Ellie when he said it. He looked at the judge straight and level. "She's family, Your Honor," he said. The room was very quiet for a moment. Ellie looked down at her hands. "That's sufficient," Wallace said. "We'll proceed. Mr. Aldrich, you'll have ample opportunity to question Miss Whitmore's conclusions. Let's begin." Aldrich sat down with the measured ease of a man repositioning, not retreating. He had more cards to play, and everyone in the room knew it. Ellie went first. She walked the judge through every document in sequence: the Walker forgery, the ink age comparison, the pen pressure analysis, the missing company seal, the date inconsistency. She didn't use legal language. She used the language she'd developed in 12 years of catching cheating drummers and crooked suppliers, which was the language of plain observation, stated once clearly, and then stopped. Wallace asked 3 questions, precise and pointed, from a man who'd already read the materials and wanted specific answers. She gave them without elaboration. Aldrich cross-examined. He was methodical, not hostile, chipping at the edges rather than attacking the center. "Miss Whitmore, you contend the ink age on the signature differs from the body of the note. Is that correct?" "It does differ, yes. And you base this conclusion on observation alone. No scientific analysis, no laboratory examination." "Observation and 12 years of reading paper. The same method banks use when they're not sure a check is genuine. Banks also make errors." "They do," Ellie said, "which is why I'm not asking you to take my word alone. I'm asking you to look at the comparison I've laid out James Walker's real signatures against the forgery, and tell me you don't see the difference." She held Aldrich's eyes. "You've read documents your whole career, Mr. Aldrich. Look at those two signatures and tell me honestly they came from the same hand." Aldrich looked at the papers. A full beat passed. "I'll submit the documents speak for themselves," he said and moved on. The Kellys testified next. Patrick Kelly was brief, almost terse, the words coming out like a man paying a debt he'd been putting off too long. Martha Kelly behind him was steadier and more specific, and when she described the day the men came to tell them the land was gone, her voice broke only once on the word 32, as in 32 years. A woman in the gallery made a sound, then another. Carter sat at his table and looked at nothing. Agnes Pruitt testified last among the witnesses. 81 words total. She set the receipt on the judge's bench, described what it was and what date it bore, and sat back down. "That's all you have to say?" Wallace asked. "That's all the truth requires," Agnes Pruitt said. Aldrich looked like he was going to cross-examine her, and then thought better of it. Samuel presented the 7 filings in the dry, precise voice of a man who'd memorized what he needed to say and had no interest in drama. The filings were entered into record. Then Ellie stood and presented James Walker's letter. She read it aloud because she felt it needed to be heard in the air of that room, not just reviewed on a page. When she finished, the courtroom was so quiet, the creak of the building settling was audible. Wallace sat with his hands folded on the bench for a moment. "When was this written?" "March 12th, 1884. Your Honor, 2 years before Mr. Walker died. The handwriting matches every document in the Walker family ledger. And it was found where? In the family Bible, inside the front cover pocket. No one had looked for it. No one knew it was there." She paused. "He wrote it because he saw Carter coming, and he wanted the truth to exist somewhere in case he wasn't around to say it himself." The room stayed quiet. Aldrich said, "Your Honor, a personal letter written by a deceased man is not admissible." "It goes to motive counselor," Wallace said, and the edge in his voice was not anger exactly, but the end of patience. "A man who threatened the note holder in writing before the note allegedly existed is a man with documented motive to forge that note. The letter is admitted." He looked at Carter's table. "Do you wish to present your case, Mr. Aldrich?" Aldrich presented his case. He was good at it. He produced a county assessor's letter supporting Carter's valuation of the East Pasture. He produced a statement from a Cheyenne banking official attesting to the Cheyenne Land and Cattle Company's existence. He produced 3 character references for Nathaniel Carter from men in neighboring counties whose names meant nothing to anyone in the room. He did not call Carter to testify. Ellie noted that carefully. He called Dillard Ellison. The room shifted when Ellison stood. Ellie watched him cross to the front, and she watched the way he moved wrong. Too careful the walk of a man carrying something heavy he was trying not to show. Aldrich's questions were brief and clearly designed to establish the minimum. Ellison was a notary. He had witnessed the signing. He had recorded the documents accordingly. "And you witnessed James Walker sign this note?" Aldrich said. Ellison hesitated. It was a small hesitation. A half-second. The kind that could pass for nerves. The kind a less attentive room might miss. Wallace did not miss it. "I witnessed a signing," Ellison said. Aldrich paused. "You witnessed James Walker sign the note in question." "I witnessed a signing," Ellison said again, and this time the 2 words landed in the room with a weight that pressed on everyone who heard them. Aldrich went very still. "Mr. Ellison, I need you to be specific." "I witnessed a man sign a document," Ellison said, and his voice was coming apart now. "I was told it was James Walker. I wasn't there when I wasn't in the room when—" He stopped. He pressed his hands flat to the chair arms. "I cannot swear it was James Walker. I put my name to a document that was told to me was already signed, and I put my name to it because I was told to, and I was told to by Nathaniel Carter, and I—" "Mr. Ellison," Aldrich's voice had gone cold. "I must advise you." "I don't want your advice." Ellison's voice broke fully. "I want to not go to prison for a man who's been holding something over my head for 6 years. That's what I want." He looked at the judge. "I want to tell the truth right now. Your Honor and I want whatever consideration the court can give a man who was pushed into this, and not a man who walked in freely. Because I did not walk in freely. I was dragged." The courtroom erupted. Wallace's gavel hit the bench 3 times hard and deliberate. "Order! We will have order!" Carter's chair scraped back. He was on his feet, and for the first time in 2 weeks, Ellie saw him as he truly was, not the pleasant man with the warmthless smile, not the smooth operator with the Cheyenne attorney. Just a man who had run a scheme for years and was watching it come apart in a Tuesday morning courthouse and was at his core furious about it. "He's lying," Carter said. "He's a frightened small man trying to save himself." "Mr. Carter." Wallace's voice barely rose, and it didn't need to. "You will sit down. You will not speak again in this proceeding without my direct invitation. Do you understand me?" Carter looked at the judge. The room looked at Carter. Something moved through his face calculation, then the old smooth surface coming back, and underneath it, something cold and exposed, and he sat down. Ellison was given 20 minutes with Wallace in the back office, both attorneys excluded. When he came back out, his face was exhausted, and his posture had the particular quality of a man who has put down something very heavy and feels lighter and worse at the same time. "Court will resume in 15 minutes, Wallace said. "I have seen enough." The recess emptied the courthouse to the front steps. Ellie was standing apart from the crowd, organizing her papers back into the oilcloth, when she heard Carter's footstep behind her and felt the air change. "Last chance," he said very quietly. Just to her. No attorney nearby. "I lose this, and the Attorney General goes after me criminally. They've been looking for a reason. When that happens, everything I know about how things work in this county comes out. Every deal, every handshake, every man who looked the other way when he should have looked, including some men connected to people you're now friendly with." His voice was absolutely level. "Walk away now, Miss Whitmore. Take the brother's gratitude and find somewhere else to put your talents. Some attorney in Cheyenne will pay you well to read paper, but don't be standing in Harrow Creek when this goes further than a land dispute." Ellie stopped organizing. She turned around. She looked at him the way she'd looked at his documents, without anger, without fear, with the same steady, focused attention she gave anything she was trying to understand completely. "You're threatening me," she said. "I'm advising you." "No, you're scared. You've been scared since Samuel came back from the courthouse with 2 black eyes and a list of 7 names. Everything since then, the second document, the abandonment papers, the Cheyenne attorney. This conversation right here has been a scared man trying to find something that works." She tilted her head slightly. "Nothing's worked, and this won't either. Miss Whitmore, I was turned out of a town once," she said, and her voice went very quiet and very clear. "By a man like you, with papers like yours, and I walked away because I didn't have anyone standing with me, and I didn't know yet how to fight it. I have thought about that walk every day since." She met his eyes without blinking. "I am not walking away from this. Not this time." "You will regret. I think you ought to step away from her." Caleb's voice was even and low and absolute, and he was already there 2 steps behind Ellie, and Thomas was beside him, and Samuel a step behind Thomas, and the 3 of them stood in a line that left no question about where they intended to remain. Carter looked at the 3 Walker brothers, then at Ellie. Then for just a moment, the calculation left his face entirely, and what was underneath it was something small and exposed and afraid. The smooth surface came back. "Gentlemen," he said, and walked inside. Caleb waited until he was gone. "You all right?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "That I should walk away. And I told him I wouldn't." She looked up at him. "You don't have to look like that. I'm not shaken." "I know you're not," he said. "I'm just—" He stopped. "I'm glad we were here." "So am I," she said honestly. They went back inside. Judge Wallace reconvened at 11:42, and the room came to attention. "I have reviewed all materials presented this morning," Wallace said, "including the sworn testimony of Dillard Ellison, which I will characterize as credible and significant. I will now state my findings." Nobody in the room breathed. The note presented by Nathaniel Carter as evidence of debt owed by the late James Walker to the Cheyenne Land and Cattle Company is not a legitimate instrument. The evidence of forgery is sufficient to satisfy this court on multiple independent grounds. The physical examination of the document, the comparative signature analysis, the absence of proper corporate authentication, and the testimony of the purported witness that he did not in fact witness the alleged signing. He set his papers down. The note is void. Black Creek Ranch remains the property of the Walker family in its entirety. The counterclaim regarding the East Pasture bill of sale is similarly void on identical grounds, as both documents bear Ellison's fraudulent witness and the same physical hallmarks of forgery identified in Miss Whitmore's analysis. Carter's attorney sat absolutely still. "Furthermore," Wallace said, and the word changed the temperature of the room, "the evidence presented today, specifically the 7 filings through Ellison's fraudulent notarial practice, the cross-referenced forgery evidence, and Mr. Ellison's testimony regarding coercion, constitutes a pattern of criminal conduct sufficient to warrant referral to the Territorial Attorney General's office for investigation of fraud, extortion, and filing of false instruments with a public office." He looked directly at Carter. "You are not under arrest at this moment, but you are advised strongly not to leave the territory pending the Attorney General's review. I will be sending my findings by telegraph this afternoon." The room broke open. It wasn't orderly. People were standing, talking, moving. Agnes Pruitt put both hands over her face and didn't take them down for a while. Martha Kelly reached across Patrick and grabbed his arm and held on. Samuel made a sound Ellie had never heard from him, something raw and young and entirely unguarded. Thomas had his arm around Caleb's shoulders. Caleb didn't say anything. He just stood very still with his brother's arm around him, and he looked at the judge's bench and the papers spread across the table and James Walker's letter at the top of the stack. Whatever he felt in that moment, he kept between himself and his father. Ellie stood at the edge of all of it and let it be. Let the room have its noise and its relief and its long overdue exhale. She felt like she'd done something that mattered. Carter left the courthouse with Aldrich at his elbow and his second attorney behind, and he walked through the crowd without looking at anyone. The crowd parted for him not out of respect, but out of the instinctive space people give a man whose road ahead just got very long and very narrow. Ellie watched him go. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt something quieter than that, the feeling of a thing that was wrong being made right, which is not the same as happiness, but is sometimes more satisfying than happiness manages to be. "Miss Ellie," she turned. Vera Higgins was beside her, and Vera was a woman who managed her face well, who'd spent years cultivating the expression of a person who knows things without showing they know things. But she wasn't managing her face right now. "I owe you an apology," Vera said. "Mrs. Higgins, no. I stood in front of your wagon 2 weeks ago and I told you it wasn't right. A woman alone with 3 men. I said this town watches out for the Walker family." She held Ellie's eyes. "I wasn't watching out for them. I was minding other people's business in the name of decency and calling it care. And the whole time you were the only one in this county actually doing the thing I claimed to be doing." She stopped. "I'm sorry for what I said to you on that road." Ellie looked at her for a moment. "You came to the fire," Ellie said. "You sent for the judge. You brought Agnes Pruitt." "That's not the same." "It's enough," Ellie said. "It's more than enough, Vera." Vera blinked. She'd clearly prepared a longer apology and wasn't quite sure what to do with herself now that it wasn't needed. She straightened up and nodded once with the dignity of a woman who has been given more grace than she expected and intends to be worthy of it. "The town's coming out Saturday," she said, "to help rebuild the barn. 14 families said yes before noon. My husband counted." She paused. "I also plan to organize a dinner." I intend to feed you so thoroughly you won't be able to walk back to the ranch until Sunday." Ellie laughed. It surprised her, the full, unguarded sound of it. She hadn't heard herself laugh like that in longer than she could place. Vera looked startled. Then she smiled genuinely for the first time Ellie had ever seen from her. "Good," Vera said. "That's settled then." Saturday came bright and cold, the way Montana mornings have of reminding you summer won't last. By 7 o'clock, wagons were already turning up the Black Creek track. By 8, there were 30 people in the yard, and someone had started a cook fire without being asked. By 9, the first new wall beam was going up, and the sound of hammers hitting wood carried out across the valley in the clear air like something being announced. Ellie stood on the porch and watched it, and couldn't quite locate the feeling in her chest, too large for gratitude, too grounded for disbelief. Something in between, something she didn't have a word for yet. McGrath was working the frame alongside Thomas, the two of them talking quietly between hammer swings, the way men do when they're working toward something, and both know it. Abe Tillman was mixing mortar with his oldest son. The young woman Ellie had learned her name now, Clara Davies, was passing water down the line, her children running underfoot, and her husband was on the crossbeam, with a level calling down measurements, and once he looked down at Ellie on the porch and gave her a nod that wasn't complicated and didn't need to be. Vera Higgins arrived at 10 with 2 other women and a wagon full of food, and she set up a table in the yard with the command authority of a woman who has been organizing communal meals her whole life and is very good at it. Patrick Kelly came. He didn't say anything when he arrived, just tied his horse and picked up a hammer. Martha was behind him. She came straight to Ellie. "How's the arm?" she asked, meaning Caleb's. "Healing," Ellie said. "Good." Martha looked at the wall going up. "This valley's been quiet too long," she said. "Quiet in the wrong way. The way it goes quiet when people know something's wrong and decide not to look at it." She paused. "I'm glad somebody looked." "You looked," Ellie said. "You kept that original note for 2 years." "I kept it, and I sat on it," Martha said. "That's not the same thing as fighting." She looked at Ellie. "You fought." By noon, the first wall was complete, and the second was framed. And the yard had that particular feeling of a crowd that has found a rhythm together, where the work is harder than any one person and easier than you'd think, with enough hands and nobody stopping to ask whose job it is. Samuel appeared at Ellie's elbow with a plate. "Vera says you haven't eaten." "Vera's watching me." "Vera's watching everybody. It's what she does. She means well by it now, I think." He held out the plate. "Eat, Ellie, before she comes over here and makes it a whole event." Ellie took the plate. She looked at the new barn wall and the people working and the food on the table and the Walker brothers in the thick of all of it, and she ate and she let herself be fed, and she didn't apologize for the appetite. Outside the courthouse, Caleb found her. The crowd had thinned. The Saturday workers gone home, tired and satisfied. The food table cleared the yard, quiet in the good way, the way it goes quiet when the work is done and done right. Caleb came around the corner of the half-built barn and stood in front of her, and he didn't have his hat in his hands this time. He'd put it back on, which she'd come to understand was what he did when his mind was settled. "So," he said. "So," she agreed. "We won." "You won," she said. "I just read some papers." "Ellie." His voice was patient and a little dry. "You read papers in a burning barn. The papers weren't in the barn. You know what I mean." She did know. She let herself know it, the whole of it, the rifle barrel and the plate of eggs and the Bible letter and the root cellar and Caleb on one knee under a burning beam and 20 people who showed up when it counted and a judge who came 2 days early because a town councilman wrote a letter. She let herself hold the full weight of it without deflecting it or filing it away before she'd felt it. It was real. All of it was real. "What happens now?" she said. "Now." He looked at his brothers putting tools away across the yard and at the new barn wall, catching the last of the afternoon light. "Now we go home and figure out what we've got and what we need and how to get from one to the other. Same as any day." He looked back at her. "Just better footing than yesterday." "Better footing than yesterday," she repeated. And better company, he said quiet just between them. She looked at him. He looked at her. And it was there between them the thing that had been building since a rifle barrel and a plate of eggs and a hat taken off in a kitchen. Not finished being built, not ready to be named, but real, and they both knew it was real, and neither of them needed to say anything about it in a yard in Harrow Creek on a Saturday evening. "Let's go home," Ellie said. He nodded. Thomas and Samuel fell in behind them, and the four of them walked together through a yard that had been full of neighbors all day and was theirs again now, and the new barn wall stood at their back, solid and square, and put up by 30 pairs of hands that had finally decided to show up. And Ellie Whitmore walked home with her family. Just the road under her feet, and home at the end of it. The weeks after the hearing had a different quality to them, quieter on the surface, but fuller underneath the way a field looks the same after rain, but is doing something completely different below the ground. Carter was not arrested that first week nor the second, but his name was gone from the valley in the way powerful names go, when power stops protecting them. People stopped saying it the way they'd said it before, with that particular careful inflection of someone aware of consequences. Now, when someone mentioned Nathaniel Carter, they said it the way you say the name of something that used to be dangerous and isn't anymore, with a kind of exhausted relief. The first official letter from the Territorial Attorney General's office arrived on a Thursday, addressed to Judge Wallace, and forwarded through Vera Higgins's husband, who had become their unofficial connection to every piece of news worth knowing in Harrow Creek. Thomas read it at the kitchen table and passed it to Caleb, and Caleb passed it to Ellie without a word. Carter had been formally indicted on 11 counts. Fraud, extortion, filing false instruments with a public office, conspiracy to deprive landowners of property through fraudulent means. The list went on longer than Ellie had expected, which told her the Attorney General's office had been building something of their own for a while, and the Walker case had given them what they needed to move. 11 counts, Samuel said. Minimum, Ellie said. They'll find more when they go through Ellison's records. Is that good for us? It's finished for him, Caleb said quietly. That's what it is. The second letter came a week later, and this one was addressed to Patrick Kelly. Martha brought it out to Black Creek herself, because she'd been writing out every few days since the hearing this time, with her eyes red and her chin up, and the envelope held in both hands like something precious. The Creek land was being reviewed for full restitution. The Territorial Land Office, following the Attorney General's findings, had suspended all transfers executed through Ellison's fraudulent practice pending individual review. Patrick Kelly's South Creek land, 32 years of his family's work, was going to be returned to him. Not maybe. Not pending further review, the letter said returned. Martha stood in the Walker kitchen and couldn't speak for a full minute, and nobody made her try. 32 years. She finally said to nobody in particular. Enoch was right the whole time. The whole time. He was, Ellie said. And he died not knowing it would come right. He knew, Ellie said. Somewhere he knew. Men like Enoch Kelly don't stop being right just because nobody's proved it yet. Martha looked at her for a long time. Then she reached out and gripped Ellie's hand hard. Brief, the grip of a woman who has held things together alone for a long time, and is only now allowing herself to feel the weight of what she's been carrying. Then she let go, straightened up, and went home to tell Patrick. It was Thomas who mentioned the Cheyenne letter. Not to Ellie, to Samuel in the barn, in a voice that wasn't quite quiet enough. Ellie was passing the open door with a bucket, and she heard her name and stopped. She got a letter from a Cheyenne attorney 3 days ago, Thomas was saying. Heard about the case. Apparently it's traveled further than we thought. He's offering paid work document examination forgery claims, land disputes like this one. Says she'd be good at it. A pause. He's probably right. Is she going to take it? A longer pause. She hasn't said, but Caleb found it on the table 2 days ago and read the return address and put it back down and went out back and hasn't mentioned it since. Ellie stood in the doorway with the bucket and thought about that. Then she walked on. She hadn't answered the letter. She'd read it 3 times, put it away, found herself reading it a 4th time late at night when she couldn't explain why she kept going back to it, when she already knew what it said. The honest answer, the one she hadn't said out loud to anyone, was that she didn't know what she wanted, which was not something Eleanor Whitmore was accustomed to not knowing. She'd always known. She'd known she wanted her father's store to survive. She'd known she wanted food and shelter when she had neither. She'd known clear as creek water that she wanted to help the walkers when nobody else would. She knew how to want things that were necessary. She'd never been in a situation where two things were possible, and both of them felt necessary in different ways. She was thinking about this at the far end of the east field when she heard Caleb's boots behind her. She didn't turn around. "You read it," she said. "The return address," he said. "Didn't read the letter." "But Thomas told you what it said." A beat. Thomas talks. He does. She turned. Caleb was standing a few yards away with his hands in his coat pockets and his hat on, which meant his mind was settled, except that something in his jaw said it wasn't entirely settled, which she'd also come to read. "Are you going?" he said. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That's not a no. It's not a yes either." She looked at him. "It's legitimate work, Caleb. Good money. The kind I'm actually built for in a place that's offering it because of what I did here. That's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's not nothing." "But," she stopped. "But," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. At this man who had taken his hat off to her in his own kitchen. Who had not once in all of it looked at her like she was less than she was. "I don't want to go," she said. It came out quieter than she'd intended. "I don't want to go, Caleb. But I don't know if I have the right to stay. This isn't my ranch. These aren't my brothers. I came in through your barn on a rainy night, and I've been borrowing your life for 2 months, and I can't—" She stopped again. "I can't just decide I'm staying because it feels like home. That's not how the world works." Caleb took his hands out of his coat pockets. "Come with me," he said. "Caleb, just come. 5 minutes." She came. He walked her around the north side of the main house, past the old equipment shed, down the east fence line, toward the cottonwood stump, where she'd opened the irrigation lever the night of the fire. And past the stump, maybe 40 yards further along the fence, there was something she hadn't paid close attention to, something she'd seen in pieces and not looked at directly because it was behind the equipment shed and not on her usual path. She looked at it now. It was a house, not finished. 2 walls up solid, 2 walls framed the roof not yet started. Small one main room, a porch sketched in with unfinished boards. But the foundation was stone set, careful and level. And the framing was tight, and the window openings were sized for real glass, not oilcloth. And whoever had been building it had been building it to last. She stood and looked at it without speaking. "When did you start this?" she finally said. "Week after the hearing," Caleb said beside her. "A week after." She turned to him. "You started building this before you knew whether I was staying." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her with the patience of a man who has thought about an answer a long time and is saying it exactly once. "Because you slept in a barn," he said, "when you deserved a house. Because every door in 3 counties shut in your face and you kept walking when most people would have stopped. Because you walked into a fire for my family and read my father's letter like it mattered to you personally, and it did. And I could tell, and that told me something." He paused. "You told me once you didn't know if you had the right to stay. I'm telling you that's the wrong question. The right question is whether you want to. And I'm asking it plain, Ellie Whitmore, because I don't know another way to ask things. Do you want to stay?" Ellie looked at the house. At the stone foundation, set careful and level. At the window openings, sized for real glass. She thought about the Cheyenne letter. About the road she'd walked in on 9 days without a roof, the carpetbag, and the holes in her boots, and every door that had shut in her face. She thought about her father's store, and the man who'd taken it, and the town that hadn't stood with her. She'd told herself on that road that the world was cruel clean through. She'd been wrong. "Yes," she said. "I want to stay." Something in Caleb's face, something held carefully in place for a long time, let go. Then you're staying, he said. And this? He nodded at the unfinished walls. Will be done before the first snow. I promise you that. Caleb, she shook her head. You don't have to build me a house. I know I don't have to, he said. That's not why I'm doing it. She looked at him. He looked at her. And what was between them in that moment wasn't complicated or perfect the way people pretend beginnings are. It was two people who had been through something hard together, and had come out the other side, and were standing in a field looking at an unfinished house and knowing both of them that it was right. The roofline's wrong for snow load, she said finally. Caleb blinked. What? The angle. You'll lose it first heavy winter. You need a steeper pitch. She tilted her head. I can show you the right measurement. Of course you can, he said, and his voice had that thing in it, the warmth she'd been noticing since the first morning richer now. Of course you know that too. Don't sound surprised, she said. I'm not surprised, he said. I stopped being surprised about a week in. She almost smiled. Smart man. I have my moments, he said. She looked at the house one more time. Then she turned back toward the main house, and Caleb fell into step beside her, and they walked in the comfortable quiet she'd never had with anyone before, the quiet of people who don't need to fill every moment, who have said the important things and can let the rest wait. That night, she sat at the kitchen table after the brothers had gone to bed, and she wrote 2 letters. The first was to the Cheyenne attorney. She thanked him and told him she wasn't available for the work he'd described because she had prior obligations, but that she would be glad to correspond on specific cases where her expertise might be useful. She folded it and set it aside. The second letter she didn't plan. She picked up the pen to address the first envelope, and instead found herself writing a different address, the Territorial Attorney General's office in Helena. And then she was writing what she'd never told anyone, not even Caleb, about her father's dry goods store, and the paper she hadn't been able to fight, and the town that hadn't stood with her, and the name of the man who'd done it. She wrote for an hour without stopping. Dates, amounts, documents she still had copies of in the bottom of the carpet bag she'd carried 900 miles. She wrote it all out plain, the way she'd learned to present evidence, organized, specific, without asking for sympathy, letting the facts carry their own weight. When she finished, she sat back and read it over and thought this might come to nothing. The man who took her store might never face what Carter was facing. The Attorney General might not take it up. It might be exactly like the first time, except this time, nobody would tell her she had to walk away. She folded the letter. She was sealing it when Thomas came through the kitchen in his socks on the way to the water pitcher, the way he did every night, and he saw the 2 letters on the table and the look on her face. 2 letters, he said. 2 letters. The first one, declining the Cheyenne offer. Thomas filled his cup and leaned against the counter. And the second, Attorney General's office in Helena. She looked up at him. The man who took my store back home. Same method Carter used, same pattern, different state. I think he was part of the same network. I'm going to find out. Thomas was quiet for a moment. You're going to fight another case. From here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. She paused. If that's all right. Thomas set his cup down and crossed the kitchen and sat down across from her in the easy way. He had no announcement, like the most natural thing in the world. Ellie, he said. There's a woman who slept in our barn 6 weeks ago, who then read our father's paper upside down over a breakfast table and found the forgery in it, and went to see the Kellys, and organized the whole county into a courthouse, and walked into a burning barn and testified in front of a territorial judge, and apparently has been quietly planning to fight another case on the side. He leaned forward. Does that sound like we'd tell you it's not all right? She looked at him. Your family, Thomas said. Caleb said it to the judge, and the judge said it was sufficient, and I'm telling you it was sufficient before the judge said so. He stood back up. Send the letters. Fight your case. Build the house with him. Stay. He picked up his water cup. That's what people do when they're home. They stay. He went back to bed. Ellie sat a moment. Then she sealed the second letter. Then the first. She stacked them both neat at the edge of the table and let the kitchen settle around her. The fire in the stove was down to embers. From outside, one of the horses shifted in the new barn, the sound carrying through the wall the way sounds do in houses that are truly lived in. She had walked 900 miles to get here. She thought about this road, about every door that had shut, about every person who had looked at her and decided in one glance what she was worth and what she wasn't capable of. She had walked 900 miles and ended up in a barn in Montana, and a man had pushed a gun barrel down and crouched in the hay and asked her when someone last offered her a meal. From that one question, one act of plain decency, everything else had grown. Before the house went up, there was the matter of Black Creek itself. With Carter's indictment and Ellison's testimony entered into the territorial record, 3 other families in neighboring valleys filed their own challenges before September was a week old. The McGraths, a family named Bauer, 2 valleys over, that nobody in Harrow Creek had even known was affected. And a widow named Corliss, whose husband had signed over a timber-rich hillside 18 months before he died, in circumstances that now looked considerably less voluntary. Ellie didn't handle those cases directly. She wrote out in careful detail a description of the forgery patterns. She'd identified the specific things to look for in Ellison's documents, the questions to ask the witnesses, and she gave it to Judge Wallace to forward to whoever was taking on each family's claim. She didn't ask for credit for it. She gave it because it was the right thing to do, and because she knew better than most people in that county what it cost a family to lose land they'd worked for 30 years. Thomas found her writing at the table one night and stood behind her for a moment reading over her shoulder. "You're not going to charge them anything for this," he said. "No." "Ellie." "I had help," she said. "The Kellys, Agnes Pruitt, Vera Higgins and her husband, a boy who rode out at dawn to warn us, 20 people who showed up for a fire." She kept writing. "Nobody charged me for any of that." Thomas stood there a moment longer. Then he went to make coffee and put a cup beside her elbow without being asked. And that was that. The house went up through August and into September. Ellie worked on it alongside Caleb whenever the ranch work allowed, which was more often than a struggling cattle operation should have permitted. But the summer was kinder than the last, and the herd was healthy, and Thomas and Samuel were capable of holding things without both of them every hour. She showed Caleb the right pitch for the roof. He didn't argue about it. He changed the angle on the framing the next morning without comment, and when she came out and saw it, she said nothing, and he said nothing, and they went on building. Samuel put in the window glass himself very carefully with the concentration of a young man who has been told exactly once that broken glass costs money and has never forgotten it. Thomas built the porch steps, and they were slightly crooked, and he knew it. And Ellie decided not to mention it because some things a person needs to figure out for themselves. A letter came from Helena in early September. Brief, official, and very much to the point, the Territorial Attorney General's office was familiar with the network of fraudulent notarial practices connected to Ellison's operation. The man who had taken Ellie's store his name was in the letter, seeing it in print on official paper, sent something through her chest she hadn't expected, had been identified as an associate in the same network operating across 3 states. The office was already building a case. They wanted her documents and her testimony in writing. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it in both hands and sat very still for a moment. Not because she was shocked, she'd suspected this was possible, but because there is a difference between suspecting something and having it confirmed, between fighting for it theoretically and having official paper in your hands that says the fight is real and you are part of it. She had fought for the Walkers. Someone was now going to fight for her. Samuel found her on the porch an hour later, still holding the letter. "Good news or bad news?" he asked. "They're going after the man who took my store," she said. Samuel sat down on the top step. "That's the man who started all of this for you, the one that put you on the road." "Yes. And now he's going to get what Carter's getting." "Something like it. Maybe." She paused. "It might take years. It might come to less than I want it to. But it's happening. It's real. Somebody official is going after him, and my documents are going to be part of why. Samuel thought about that. Then he said, "You know what I think." "What?" "I think you walked 900 miles, ended up in our barn, and managed to fix your own problem and ours at the same time." He looked out across the east field where the firebreak grass had come in, green and thick. Pa would have said that's God having a sense of humor. Thomas said something like that too. Thomas and Pa thought alike. He stood. "I'm glad you're staying, Ellie, in case I haven't said so plain enough." "You've said it plain enough," she said. "Good." He went back inside. She sat on the porch until the letter felt like paper again, and not like something that might fly away if she loosened her grip. On the last day of September, with the first frost 2 weeks out, Caleb stood in the doorway of the finished house and looked at her. "It's done," he said. She stepped inside. One main room, a separate sleeping room, a proper door with a real latch windows that let in clean light from the east. A shelf along the wall at exactly the right height for a woman who'd spent 12 years reaching for ledgers. A hook by the door for a coat. She stood in the middle of her house. Her house. Not a borrowed room, not a barn floor, not a church step, not a rented shelf in someone else's life. Hers. "It's not much," Caleb said from the doorway. "Caleb Walker," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that meant she was working to keep it that way. "If you apologize for this house, I will redo your ledgers so wrong it'll take you 3 years to untangle them." He almost smiled. The real one, the one that happened without permission. "Yes, ma'am." Samuel had put his head in the door an hour before, surveyed the finished room, and said, "It smells like a real house," and then left, which was Samuel's way of saying something important without saying it. Thomas had looked at the shelf on the east wall and looked at Ellie, and nodded once with his whole face the way Thomas did things quietly, completely, without needing to explain himself. Caleb had built it. And now he was standing in the doorway of it, the way a man stands in the doorway of something he made with his own hands. Not proud exactly, because Caleb was not a man who wore pride on the outside, but with a particular stillness that meant something to him that he wasn't going to put into words. She let him have that for a moment. Then she said what she needed to say. "Thank you," she said. "For this. For all of it. Starting with the eggs." "Ellie, let me say it." She held his eyes. "A man pushed a rifle barrel down and crouched in the hay and asked me when somebody last offered me a meal. That was the first decent thing anyone had done for me in longer than I care to say. And everything else came from that. The case, the fight, the house. It all came from one man deciding that a woman sleeping in his barn deserved a plate of eggs and a question asked kind." She paused. "I'm not going to let that go unremarked, so, thank you." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You're welcome," he said. And it was the simplest possible thing he could have said, and exactly right. And then quieter. "I'd like to keep asking you kind questions, Ellie, if you'll let me. For a long time." She looked up at him, at the man who'd built her a house before she'd agreed to stay, who'd said she's family to a judge and meant it before he said it, who'd pushed a rifle barrel down in a dark barn because a woman in wet clothes with holes in her boots had looked him in the eye. "I'll let you," she said. And that was enough. For now, it was everything. Outside, Thomas and Samuel were somewhere on the far side of the yard, giving them space with the thoughtful discretion of brothers who have learned when to be somewhere else. The Montana sky in late September was doing what it does, going wide and deep, and more colors than you have names for the kind of sky that makes you understand why people stayed in this country when it was hard and cold and far from everything they'd known before. Ellie stood in her house and felt something settle into place in her chest, not with a click, not with the force of a decision. Just the quiet, certain feeling of a thing that was right, finding the shape of the space it was always meant to fill. She had arrived with nothing. No money, no family, no address, no history that anyone here had known before a rainstorm brought her to a barn. She had arrived with nothing, and a man had crouched in the hay and asked her when someone last offered her a meal, and from that single act of plain human decency, An entire life had grown. A home, a fight won, a name worth saying, brothers who claimed her out loud in front of judges, a man who built her a house before she'd decided to stay because he already knew the answer even when she didn't. She was not the woman the world had decided she was when it looked at her from doorways and cross streets. She was not lazy, not a burden, not too much to feed and too little to matter. She was the woman who read a forged signature upside down over a breakfast table, who opened an irrigation channel alone in the dark, who walked into a burning barn and lifted a timber off a man she'd known 3 weeks because it needed doing, and she was there, and she was enough. Who stood in front of a territorial judge and told the truth so plainly that a Cheyenne attorney with a briefcase that cost more than a season's wages couldn't find a way around it. That was who she was. It had always been who she was. The world had just needed a rainstorm and a leaky barn, and 3 brothers decent enough to push a rifle down to find out. Ellie Whitmore had walked into the valley with nothing. She stood now in a house built by a man who saw her worth before she'd earned a single thing in his eyes. Built before she'd agreed to stay, before she'd asked, before she'd done anything but sit down at a kitchen table and eat eggs without apology. Because that was the kind of man Caleb Walker was, and that was the kind of woman she had finally fully allowed herself to be. She had arrived with nothing. She was home. And nothing and no one in this world was ever going to make her walk away from it again.